Chapter 680. As Luo Fu meditated, he felt that the entire world and the entire untainted land had undergone some mysterious changes. Text first. This change was not caused by the quakes that were happening in the entire untainted land at this time, which spread to every inch of the void and seemed to be about to collapse and destroy the entire untainted land. Instead, it was a mysterious method that allowed his perceptive ability to obtain an incredible improvement. It allowed him to instantly see through the countless truths of the untainted land that he could not see through with his cultivation at the peak of the golden immortal realm, and even after he had ascended to the primordial immortal realm with the help of the power of will from countless living beings. The appearance of this situation was not because his cultivation realm had improved beyond imagination. Instead, it was as if the restrictions of the entire untainted land on him had suddenly been greatly reduced. In other words, the distance between him and the supreme great Tao seemed to have suddenly shrunk, causing the elusive and untraceable supreme great Tao to suddenly become countless times closer to him. So, this is the privilege of the protagonist of the world. This thought instantly appeared in Luo Fu's mind. When this thought appeared, everything that was happening around him, the collapsing untainted land, and the impending death, had completely lost their status in his eyes. All of Luo Fu's mind and heart, in an instant, were completely immersed in the new truth of the untainted land that he saw in front of him. As he immersed himself in it, in a trance, endless, incredible, and mysterious information slowly flowed through his mind, making him vaguely feel that the solid barrier that was shackling him and preventing him from breaking through the earthly immortal realm to seek the primordial immortal realm seemed to be becoming more and more fragile. His cultivation realm, which had stagnated for an unknown amount of time, also began to gradually loosen in this process. It really works. This thought flashed through Luo Fu's mind. Then, even this thought was completely drowned by the endless information and the endless mysteries of the primordial world. He was completely immersed in it, and even his own existence was completely ignored by him. During the hundreds of periods of cultivation, although Luo Fu had improved at a rapid pace, and he had the blessing of the prayers of countless living beings, which allowed him to forcibly comprehend the various principles and mysteries needed to improve his cultivation, he was not omnipotent and omniscient, nor could he solve all the problems he encountered. Proving one's Tao with force was a cultivation method, not just a method to prove one's Tao to primordial chaos. In reality, as long as one possessed power that far surpassed one's own cultivation, and then used this power to forcefully comprehend the corresponding realm of that power, forcefully touching upon the principles and mysteries required to raise one's cultivation realm. This cultivation method could be called proving one's Tao through strength. According to this definition, there were definitely many cultivators in the primordial world who used their strength to prove their Tao. After all, the primordial world was still at the beginning of the world. There were all sorts of heavenly materials and earthly treasures. As long as there was a method, it was not difficult to refine an artifact or magic treasure that could unleash power beyond one's own. As long as one had an artifact or magic treasure that could unleash power beyond one's own, one could use this method of proving one's Tao through strength to cultivate. However, the usual method of proving one's Tao through strength was not pure. Even if one had an artifact or magic treasure that could unleash power beyond one's own, it was still not enough to directly break through the shackles of one's cultivation realm and obtain a breakthrough. One still needed various other methods to assist and rely on one's own supreme wisdom to comprehend and improve. The most important reason for this was that even though the magic tools and magic treasures they refined were capable of exerting a strength that surpassed their own, the extent of the difference wasn't too great. Thus, it wasn't very helpful to their comprehension of the realm. Naturally, Luo Fu was different. With the endless willpower of the human race, the power he unleashed could even break through the earthly immortal's Tao fruit and reach the level of primordial unity. The extent of this increase was calculated by tens of thousands of times. It was naturally of great help to him in comprehending the realm. Thus, It made his cultivation method of proving one's Tao through strength seem extremely pure. That was why he could directly break through to this realm with the method of proving one's Tao through strength. However, it was precisely because this method of proving one's Tao through strength was so pure that although the improvement of his cultivation realm was extremely stable during the process of cultivation, other aspects were not completely compatible with the method he was cultivating. In other words, there were still many aspects of the Tao fruit that he cultivated that did not truly improve to the point where it was compatible with his cultivation realm. And this manifested in the hundreds of Yuan Hui's cultivation process. He had unknowingly accumulated countless questions and difficulties in cultivation. These questions and difficulties did not affect the stability of his cultivation realm, but they made him want to improve further. It made it countless times more difficult for him to break through the earthly immortal's Tao fruit to obtain the Tai Tao fruit. It was also because of this that although he had the help of endless willpower and could comprehend the mysteries of Tai countless times, his cultivation realm was still at the peak of the golden immortal realm, and he still could not truly obtain the Tai Tao fruit. Regarding this, although Luo Fu felt helpless, he also knew that this was a matter of course. His father created the Tao fruit Tao, but it was not specially created for proving one's Tao through strength. Under such circumstances, although proving one's Tao through strength could allow him to improve in the same realm, it was absolutely impossible to truly break through the realm of the Tao fruit Tao without cultivating this realm to perfection, and without making up for the various flaws left behind by proving one's Tao through strength. Although the difference between the three realms of the itinerant immortal realm, the perfected immortal realm, and the perfected immortal realm was like the difference between heaven and earth, but they were only three small realms in the earthly immortal's Tao fruit after all. Seriously speaking, to the Tao fruit, it was only an improvement between realms. Therefore, these three realms could be achieved by proving one's Tao through strength. However, if one wanted to break through to the golden immortal realm, one wanted to break through to the earthly immortal realm. To the Tao fruit, it was to break through realms. How could it be possible if one did not cultivate the earthly immortal's Tao fruit to perfection? It was precisely because of this understanding that Luo Fu was so eager to obtain the demon clan's karmic luck fulcrum, hoping to become the protagonist of the primordial world. Because he knew that as long as he became the protagonist of the world and was enveloped by the great karmic luck of the entire primordial world, then his weakness would naturally be made up for by the primordial world through various mysterious methods, allowing him to have a great chance of breaking through the shackles and obtaining the Tai Tao fruit. At this moment, his performance was just as he had predicted. The primordial world was indeed providing countless conveniences to the protagonist of the world it had set. At this time, the supreme great Tao of the primordial world seemed to be completely open. As long as Luo Fan concentrated a little, he could wander in and out of it at will, seek endless mysterious principles, understand the vast and boundless mysteries of the world, and constantly make up for the various omissions that he had left behind after using the method of proving one's Tao through strength to improve his cultivation realm. In this process, although Luo Fu's cultivation realm did not improve immediately, he felt that the barrier that shackled his cultivation realm was gradually becoming weaker. This was because of the omissions left behind by proving one's Tao through strength in the past. In the process of making up for it, the barrier to breaking through to the earthly immortal realm was constantly being cleared. The feeling of the barrier being cleared naturally meant that the barrier that shackled his cultivation realm was becoming weaker. When Luo Fu entered an inexplicable state of enlightenment, his figure gradually became ethereal, as if he was gradually merging into the primordial world that was shaking and collapsing. Guang Pu, Lei Jiuxiao, and the others beside Luo Fu looked at him, but they did not have the slightest worry, only a kind of joy and envy, because they all knew that this state was a great opportunity for Luo Fu. As long as he could survive this, Luo Fu would be able to obtain an unimaginable improvement and have all kinds of incredible progress. Even if he directly obtained the Primordial Unity Tao fruit, it would not surprise them at all. At this very moment, at the entrance of a certain grotto heaven that was millions and millions of miles away from this place, a few figures flashed slightly and shot out from the cave, landing at the entrance and revealing their true appearances. They were three young men. Among the three young men, two stood together, one in front and one behind, as if there was a difference in status. The other young man stood side by side with the young man standing in front of the two young men. Obviously, his status was equal to the higher of the two. These three people were Gu Ling, Ancestor Sky Dragon, and his servant, and Lin Tian-Nan. Fourth senior brother, this time second senior brother, and sixth junior brother have probably caused a great disaster. Looking at the current primordial world, it seems like the entire world is going to be destroyed by their battle. Gu Ling looked around and sighed. A look of despair appeared in his eyes as he said to Lin Tian-Nan, "Caused a great disaster? I don't think so. Causing trouble? I don't think so. Master's ability is not something that you and I can fathom. How do you know that this is not part of Master's plan?" Lin Tian-Nan smiled and shook his head. Now that the world is going to be destroyed, even if Master has any plans, I'm afraid that they will not succeed. Gu Ling frowned. He did not really believe Lin Tian-Nan's almost blind praise. Gu Ling was different from Lin Tian-Nan. He was originally a spirit of the heavens and earth of a certain foreign world. He controlled all living things in that foreign world. As his cultivation level increased, his experience of controlling all living things in the world in the past also improved, and he gradually understood the limits of human strength. Therefore, although he admired and respected Luo Fan, he did not think that Luo Fan was omnipotent. He still believed that Luo Fan had his limits. To him, the danger of the entire primordial world being destroyed exceeded the limits of his master's power. Even if his master came out, he would not be able to reverse the situation of the primordial world collapsing. Therefore, he said such words at this moment. Old Ancestor Tianlong's status was lower than Lin Tian-Nan's. At this moment, he did not dare to interrupt the conversation between Gu Ling and Lin Tian-Nan. However, his expression showed that he agreed with Gu Ling's words. Clearly, he felt that Gu Ling's words were very reasonable. He was also the #1 expert in the outer realm. In the eyes of others, he was an omnipotent existence. Naturally, he did not think that there was anything that could not be done to reverse the destruction of the entire primordial world. To him, this was something that exceeded the limits of his imagination. He naturally did not believe that anyone could do it, especially someone he knew. Seeing their expressions, Lin Tian-Nan knew what they were thinking. However, he was not angry because they did not believe in his master. He only smiled and said, You will know the result as you continue to watch." At this moment, Lin Tian-Nan was already in the golden immortal realm. Although he had just entered this realm, compared to ordinary cultivators who were half a step into the golden immortal realm, he was tens of thousands of times stronger. Moreover, because he cultivated the fruit of Dao Dao, he was many times stronger than ordinary cultivators in the golden immortal realm. Therefore, his current strength was only second to a few of his fellow sect members in the primordial world. He was also one of the strongest. As for Gu Ling, his cultivation realm was not much different from Lin Tian-Nan's. He had just entered the golden immortal realm and had just stabilized his realm. There was not much difference between his strength and Lin Tian-Nan's. In other words, if the two of them fought, the outcome would not be known. As for old Ancestor Tianlong, he was much weaker than the two of them. Although he had also entered the golden immortal realm, he did not cultivate the fruit of Dao Dao. The power of his divine ability was far from Luo Chunyang and Luo Gua, who were only half a step into the golden immortal realm. Compared to Lin Tian-Nan and Gu Ling, he was much weaker. The reason why the three of them appeared here at this moment was because they did not participate in the battle between Luo Fu and Lei Jiuxiao. More than 100 yuan hui ago, Lin Tian-Nan had helped Luo Fu at first. However, he felt that the battle between Luo Fu and Lei Jiuxiao was not interesting. It was not in line with his character. He felt very depressed when he participated in it. Therefore, after discovering Gu Ling and old ancestor Tianlong, he directly bid farewell to Luo Fu and traveled through the Grotto Heaven worlds with Gu Ling and old ancestor Tianlong, cultivating and gaining experience. That was because the primordial world had developed the fastest in the past 100 or so yuanhui. At every moment, there were countless strange and wonderful ideas that kept popping up, giving them countless inspirations. Coupled with the endless resources obtained by traveling through the Grotto Heaven worlds, their cultivation realm constantly increased. In the end, they finally broke through the shackles and reached the golden immortal realm not long ago. This time, they left the Grotto Heaven worlds because they felt that the Grotto Heaven worlds were becoming extremely chaotic and explosive. All kinds of unpredictable dangers were happening at every moment, making it difficult for them even with their cultivation realm. They also knew that the source of the changes was the primordial world. They knew that the primordial world was undergoing a shocking change, so they stopped traveling through the Grotto Heaven worlds and returned to the primordial world. Originally, Lin Tian Nan respected Luo Fan. Gu Ling and old ancestor Tianlong's lack of trust in Luo Fan should have made him quite dissatisfied. However, after traveling together for more than 100 yuan hui, they had already formed an extremely deep friendship. Because of this, he also understood Gu Ling very well. Seeing their behavior, he knew that it wasn't that they didn't trust their master enough. It was just that they didn't know enough about their master and weren't comprehensive enough. As long as the facts were placed in front of them, they would naturally be able to change their minds. Thus, they didn't feel any dissatisfaction. As for whether Luo Fan would really be as helpless as Gu Ling and old ancestor Tianlong thought, Lin Tian didn't doubt this at all. To him, Luo Fan, his master, the supreme existence that was respected by all living beings in the primordial world as a Tao master, was omnipotent. Even if the world was destroyed, he could create a new one. At this moment, the small problem of the primordial world being destroyed was definitely not difficult for him. Gu Ling and old ancestor Tianlong's hearts were originally filled with despair. However, after seeing Lin Tiannan's confident expression, the despair in their hearts gradually dissipated. Although they still had the fear of dying, a glimmer of hope was born. A glimmer of hope that Luo Fan was truly as omnipotent as Lin Tiannan thought, and that he could easily reverse the fate of this world's destruction. Although they still felt that this hope was rather slim, it was still hope after all. However, are we really not going to meet second senior brother and sixth junior brother? After a long while, Gu Ling frowned and asked Lin Tiannan, "There's no need. If we go now, they might misunderstand that we are blaming the two of them, causing a grudge to grow in their hearts. It would be a kind of harm to the friendship between us. It would be better to wait until the matter is over before meeting them." Lin Tiannan's gaze was distant as he spoke indifferently. There was not a single trace of fear in his eyes. There was only an indescribable indifference. It was as if the entire primordial world was constantly shaking. The pressure that affected the entire primordial world and covered the hearts of every living being, like the end of the world, was just nothingness. Among the many disciples under Luo Fan, including Luo Fu, Luo Fan's son, were the most confident in Luo Fan. The one who had the most confidence in Luo Fan was not Hong Jun, not Luo Fu, not Guang Pu, not Gu Ling, not Lei Jiuxiao, but Lin Tiannan. Lin Tiannan was born in Luo Fan's spirit Kiliacosm, grew up, and was then sent into the primordial world. His understanding of Luo Fan's omnipotence had long become an unshakable belief, not to mention that this was only a sign of the end of the world. Even if the entire primordial world was completely destroyed, he would not think that it was because his master was powerless. He would only think that this was some kind of scheme or plan of his master. Just as the disciples under Luo Fan were reacting to the tremors that were everywhere in the primordial world, in the endless starry sky, the tremors of the endless starry sky had already come to an end. In the endless void of the endless starry sky, there was almost no complete space left. The endless cracks were unimaginably dense and moved at an unimaginable speed in the void, almost destroying the entire endless starry sky. Void cracks were cracks formed by the collapse of space. The appearance of these cracks meant that the void where the crack appeared was collapsing. At this moment, the entire endless starry sky was filled with these cracks. This meant that the entire endless starry sky was close to complete collapse. Chapter 681. Under such circumstances, the entire boundless starry sky seemed to have shrunk countless times, and the infinite stars that even the void rift could not destroy became incomparably crowded. Each of these densely packed stars was incomparably huge, and each of them was enough to crush any existence of the golden immortal realm. Even the existence of the primordial unity realm would not be able to escape if they did not react in advance. At this moment, such stars were like grapes on a bunch of grapes, densely packed and overlapping, occupying the entire endless starry sky that had shrunk countless times. At this moment, the entire endless starry sky seemed to be just a place where countless densely packed stars piled up. And the hundreds of thousands of human and demon cultivators who were fighting with each other had long since died, fled, and no longer existed in this endless starry sky. At this moment, in the entire endless starry sky, only Luo Fan was still standing in a mysterious place between the untainted land and the endless starry sky. At this moment, Luo Fan was like an ordinary mortal. There was nothing special about him, and no one could tell that he was different from ordinary creatures at all. If it were not for the fact that this was not a place for ordinary people, anyone would mistake him for a mortal. He stood there, looking at the endless stars piled up like grapes in front of him with an indifferent expression, and observing the endless void cracks that covered the endless starry sky. His expression was extremely calm. Previously, when the endless void cracks had just appeared, many wiser cultivators had seized the opportunity and used the special backup methods they had prepared before the war to directly cross the void, leave the endless starry sky, and return to the untainted land. However, after all, there were very few cultivators who could make such a prompt decision. Therefore, in the end, only a few cultivators in the realm of true immortals were able to escape. As for the stronger cultivators, although they had a profound cultivation realm, they either did not prepare these escape routes or did not make prompt decisions. Instead, they died in this sudden change. Unfortunately, you have triggered the upheaval of heaven and earth. Although it is a process destined by the Supreme Great Way, it was triggered by you after all. You have created endless killing, but you still have to bear the backlash of heaven and earth. It is inevitable that you will die. All I can do is to let your life imprints be reincarnated into the virtual world. This thought flashed across Luo Fan's mind. The expression on his face was very calm, even indifferent. This was only natural. The many cultivators fighting in the endless starry sky were complete strangers to him. They were living beings he did not know at all. Even if he kept their life imprints based on the righteousness in his heart, it was impossible for him to invest too much emotion into them. If he invested too much emotion into these living beings, then his emotions would be too cheap. Since he did not devote too much emotion to these cultivators, he naturally would not be moved by their deaths. Just as various thoughts flashed through Luo Fan's mind, the accumulation of the endless stars finally produced an earth-shattering effect. In an instant, an indescribably powerful force was produced from the endless stars and quickly condensed towards the barrier where Luo Fan was. In an instant, it collided with the barrier. This strange power was a power of destruction. This power did not have any other nature, nor did it have any other meaning. It only contained the pure intent of destruction. It was a power that was materialized when the endless starry sky was finally destroyed to the extreme, and it could no longer maintain its appearance as a whole. It wanted to break through all shackles and completely escape the requirements of the endless starry sky. This power of destruction was the condensation of all laws. It was the embodiment of the power of all the stars in the endless starry sky. Under its impact, The barrier between the endless starry sky and the primordial world was like an ordinary piece of paper, and it was instantly torn apart. At that moment, Luo Fan's body swayed, and he turned into an existence between reality and illusion. This kind of reality and illusion was different from the reality and illusion of other living beings. It was as if he was in another space and time. It was as if Luo Fan had already left the space and time of the primordial world and was in another space and time. When this change appeared, he took a step forward and instantly arrived at the edge of the power of destruction. When he appeared, it was the moment when the power of destruction broke through the barrier between the endless starry sky and the primordial world. Under this power of destruction, the endless star energy, the strange baleful aura that had accumulated in the endless starry sky for a long time, the strange astral energy, and all the various powers that existed in the endless starry sky were like a torrent that had broken through the dam of a reservoir. They followed the passage that the power of destruction had broken through and surged over crazily. They streaked past in front of Luo Fan and rushed towards the primordial world. At that moment, Luo Fan did not hesitate at all. With a thought, endless magic power surged out of his body. At this moment, the Daluo Dao fruit in his body was almost completely activated, and the function of producing magic power was exerted to the extreme. In every moment, the number of magic power units produced by the Daluo Dao fruit was more than 10 million times that of the normal situation. At the same time, the world of his consciousness was also activated crazily. Magic power units that were hundreds of times more than the magic power units produced by the Daluo Dao fruit rushed out of the world of his consciousness. Together with the magic power units produced by the Daluo Dao fruit, they rushed out of his body and instantly pounced forward toward the passage formed by the power of destruction. Each of these magic power units was the condensation of all the cultivation achievements that Luo Fan had achieved since he had entered the Tao until he had reached the peak of the Daluo dispelling Dao. They were so powerful and had so many wonderful uses that they had reached an incredible level. Almost if every magic power unit exerted its full power, it could easily crush a cultivator who had achieved the primordial unity gold number, like crushing an ant. Such an endless amount of magical power units suddenly surged out of his body, but in an instant, it produced countless strange phenomena. After these magic power units appeared, pieces of strange space-time condensed out of thin air, as if these magic power units were constantly creating these strange space-time out of thin air in the process of flying. All the magic power units condensed into countless strands of magic power, and the space-time condensed around these magic power appeared extremely complete, almost like 1,000 worlds. In them, one could even see that there were countless living beings living in them, cultivating in them, and seeking to break through the restrictions of the strange space-time. These countless strands of magic power, along with the strange space-time, streaked across mysterious trajectories and went straight around the passage. In an instant, they had completely enveloped the entire passage. The space-time brought by these countless strands of magic power completely condensed and fused in this process, turning into a strange space-time composed of billions of worlds. This strange space-time was extremely mysterious. It seemed to be an extremely illusory existence, but also an extremely real existence. In this strange space-time that seemed both illusory and real at the same time, the endless worlds were born and destroyed at any time and place. To the outside world, every birth and destruction was illusory in an instant, but to these worlds, every birth and destruction was like the passing of billions of years. In between each birth and destruction, these worlds gave birth to endless living beings and endless cultivators. Among them, there were countless living beings who could cultivate the supreme divine ability of these worlds and soar from those worlds, turning into strange magic power units and fusing with Luo Fan's countless strands of magic power. It could be said that they had obtained a different kind of true transcendence, and it could also be said that they had obtained another kind of truth. In this process, the countless strands of magic power continued to grow. Just like that, after only a few breaths of time, the countless strands of Fa-Li had already strengthened to the point that they were completely linked together, forming a huge cylindrical barrier that directly enveloped the entire passageway. There were no longer any traces of gaps in it. When a magic barrier was fully formed, the whole passage seemed to have entered another time and space, and the short passage seemed to have been stretched for millions of miles. In an instant, it became a distance that even a primordial gold core cultivator would need to spend hundreds of thousands of years to cross. Such a distance would require such a long time for a primordial unity gold cultivator to cross, so the effect was naturally equally great for the power that swarmed into these passages. In an instant, the power that seemed to be about to enter the primordial world disappeared without a trace after entering the passage, as if it had been completely devoured by the passage. Seeing this, Luo Fan stopped the endless magic power units produced by the Daluo Dao fruit and the Sea of Consciousness world. His body swayed, and he reappeared. He was no longer in the illusory form from before. In this way, these powers will become docile under the strange power of the passage. The impact on the primordial world will be weakened by at least 100 million times, and it will no longer be able to destroy the entire primordial world. Such a thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind. He did not stay any longer. He took a step forward and entered the primordial world. The place where he appeared was the closest place between the primordial world and the endless starry sky, the top of Buzhou Mountain. At this moment, an incomparably huge shadow that was hundreds of millions of miles wide appeared above the top of Buzhou Mountain. This shadow was extremely illusory, as if it was just some kind of light projection. However, as long as anyone saw the shadow, they would definitely not treat it as an illusion. This was because behind this shadow were densely packed stars. There were countless stars, and they were densely packed together. The stars almost formed a screen of light, illuminating the Dongxue like a mirror made of starlight. It emitted an indescribable aura of tyranny and destruction. It was enough to completely intimidate any living being that saw this shadow. It would only cause fear in their hearts. How could any living being feel that it was an illusion? No matter how good one's eyesight was, they would not be able to see the existence of any stars by looking up at the void. It was easy to imagine that all the stars in the endless starry sky were gathered at the other end of this Dongxue. At this moment, they were constantly squeezing against each other, as if they wanted to descend through this Dongxue. The aura emitted by the endless stars could intimidate other living beings, but it was naturally nothing to Luo Fan. He stood at the top of Buzhou Mountain and felt the pressure pressing down from above become stronger and stronger. After a few breaths, it had already increased to 100 times its original size. After a few more breaths, it had increased to 1,000 times. This kind of pressure was naturally nothing to Luo Fan, who was already at the peak of the Daluo scattered Dao. However, it had almost exceeded the limit of the Buzhou Mountain, causing the entire Buzhou Mountain to emit a strange creaking sound, as if it was about to collapse under the pressure. At this moment, the tremor that filled the entire primordial world and made almost all living beings in the entire primordial world feel that the primordial world was collapsing and was about to be destroyed instantly disappeared. However, this disappearance did not make everyone feel that the crisis of the entire primordial world had passed. Instead, it was as if the crisis had already reached the extreme. It was so strong that things would go in the opposite direction when they reached the extreme. This caused almost every living being to feel an indescribable pressure in their hearts. It made them feel as if they had to use all their strength to barely breathe. Tianjing was not within the range of the huge Dongxue shadow that was hundreds of millions of kilometers around Buzhou Mountain. However, it wasn't too far away. Looking from Tianjing, one could still see an incomparably large illusory image enveloping Mount Buzhou, as well as the light and shadows of the endless stars within the illusory image. In an instant, other than Luo Fu, who was still in a deep comprehension realm, Everyone else understood the source of the world-destroying crisis. The stars are falling. Even Lei, Jiu Xiao, and the others, who had absolute confidence in Luo Fan, could not help but feel inexplicably shaken. Each of these countless stars is enough to crush millions of us together like an ant. Can Master really solve this crisis? Almost everyone had similar thoughts in their minds. Luo Fan naturally did not care about the thoughts of his disciples. He stood there calmly and endured the infinite pressure before the endless stars fell. His expression did not change at all. He was still calm and indifferent. Suddenly, he had an idea and said, "Come to Buzhou Mountain to meet me." As soon as the voice left his mouth, it seemed to have turned into the most wonderful Dharma treasure in the world. It condensed into a spirit body that was in between reality and illusion. With a tremble and a sway, it drilled into the void and swam towards an unfathomable space-time that was infinitely far away. In an instant, it arrived in front of that inexplicable space-time. With a tremble and a sway, it turned back into a voice and echoed in that inexplicable space-time. This space-time was extremely strange. It had a radius of 100 miles, and there was only a thatched hut and a flat ground. After the flow of time in the space-time was increased, it had reached 12,960 times that of the outside world. However, it was the most exquisite treasure in the entire primordial world, apart from the Void Wuji Palace. At this moment, when Luo Fan's voice echoed in this strange space-time, a clear voice suddenly sounded in the thatched hut. Disciple Hong Jun obeys master's orders. After the voice finished speaking, a middle-aged man slowly walked out of the thatched hut. The middle-aged man had an ordinary figure, and he wore a black robe. His entire body was suffused with an unyielding Tao insight. Every single movement he made, every single breath he took would draw upon the supreme grand Tao, and it contained boundless, unfathomable profundities. It seemed as if he was constantly evolving the boundless profundities of the supreme grand Tao. This middle-aged man's gaze was extremely calm. Endless light and shadows were constantly flickering in his eyes. He seemed extremely deep and contained endless wisdom. This middle-aged man was naturally the first disciple of Luo Fan, Hongjun. At this moment, Hongjun's cultivation realm had already reached the level where he was about to attain the Tai Dao fruit. In this realm, Hongjun might not be able to comprehend the key and attain the Tai Dao fruit even after billions of years. Or he might be touched in the next moment and attain the Tai Dao fruit without any obstacles. Moreover, because of this state of being about to attain the Tai Dao fruit, he could also slightly use a trace of the mysterious power that he had after attaining the Tai Dao fruit. Thus, he could exert a strength that was tens of thousands of times greater than that of ordinary golden immortals. In other words, at this moment, Hongjun was already at the half-step Tai golden immortal realm. In terms of realm, this realm was stronger than Luo Fu, who was at the peak of the golden immortal realm. The strength that he could exert was dozens of times stronger than the power that Luo Fu could exert when he used the wish power of countless living beings to reach the primordial unity realm. It could be said that the current Hongjun, without any external help, was already the second person in the primordial world. The power of his mystical abilities was only second to his master, Luo Fan, who was respected by all living beings in the primordial world as the Tao Master. At this moment, the strange space-time he was in was the highest level of the Dharma treasure he had refined, the Purple Cloud Palace. Although the Purple Cloud Palace was named a palace by him, its appearance was that of a pagoda. After being tempered and adjusted for more than 100 yuan Hui, the pagoda was divided into 33 levels. The flow of time on each level was several times faster than the next level, and the area of each level was also smaller than the next level. In this way, on the 33rd level, a small world with a radius of only 100 miles appeared. At this moment, the flow of light was able to speed up to 12,960 times that of the primordial world. In the past few years, the situation in the primordial world had been turbulent and had changed almost instantly. However, Hong Jun did not care about the changes in the outside world at all. He only controlled the Purple Cloud Palace to travel everywhere in the primordial world. He used the mysterious power of the Purple Cloud Palace to teleport time, to obtain an incomparably long time to cultivate quietly. It was also because of the accumulation of almost endless time that he was able to raise his cultivation realm to such a profound level. Chapter 682. After Hong Jun walked out of the thatched cottage, the Purple Cloud Palace trembled slightly and moved through the void. In an instant, it traversed hundreds of millions of miles, passed through thousands of mountains and rivers, and directly appeared at the top of Buzhou Mountain. QQ Group 4. 8065. The 33-story pagoda was as tall as a person. The moment it stepped through the void, it stirred up endless space-time turbulence, as if a piece of cloth had suddenly been rolled into a ball and then unfolded again. If it was at an ordinary time, then this strand of such a strong fluctuation in space would probably be capable of directly shattering a 30 kilometers tall mountain. But at this moment, at the peak of Mount Buzhou, it merely spread out to an area of 10 m before it was powerless to continue spreading, and it directly vanished as if it had never appeared. The reason for this was that the peak of Mount Buzhou was withstanding the boundless pressure from the starry sky at this very moment. This pressure did not only target physical objects, but all intangible existences, including space-time. To disturb space-time while withstanding such astonishing pressure, the power needed was naturally many times stronger than under normal circumstances. That was why this happened. Although the space-time turbulence could normally destroy a mountain that was tens of millions of feet tall, its power could only spread out to a radius of 3 feet, and it did not even really disturb the liquefied sea of primordial qi. After the pagoda appeared, it turned and Hong Jun walked out of it. The pagoda also gradually shrank and finally went into Hong Jun's body from the back of his head. Disciple Hong Jun greets Master. After Hong Jun left the Purple Cloud Palace, he directly knelt in the air to Luo Fan, who was floating above the liquefied sea of primordial qi, and greeted him. Luo Fan smiled and raised his hand to help him up. No need to be so polite. It's really rare for you to be able to become a half-step primordial unity in such a short time, and I'm very pleased. Hong Jun hurriedly said, I dare not accept Master's praise. It's all thanks to Master that I can achieve what I have today. Luo Fan shook his head. You don't have to be so humble. All cultivation is just a condition. Although it's essential, it's not the deciding factor. It's all thanks to your own ability that you can achieve what you have today. When Hong Jun heard this, he seemed to have understood something. Luo Fan didn't talk about this topic anymore. He summoned Hong Jun this time, not to praise Hong Jun, but because he had more important things for Hong Jun to do. Naturally, he would stop talking about these things. Therefore, he waved his hand and said, Do you know what this means for the primordial world? When Hong Jun heard Luo Fan's question, he quickly said, I have a guess, but I'm not sure. Master, please give me some advice. Ha. After not seeing you for some time, you have become more cautious, said Luo Fan with a smile. I wouldn't dare. Fine, I didn't ask you to come here this time to test you. Instead, there are some things I need you to do. Just listen to me. Luo Fan smiled and said, At this moment, the primordial world is encountering a great tribulation of heaven and earth. This great tribulation is even greater than the previous great tribulation of heaven and earth. If we're not careful, the entire primordial world might collapse and be destroyed. However, if we survive this great tribulation, it will be of great benefit to the primordial world and the living beings who survive it. When Hong Jun heard what Luo Fan said, his body could not help but tremble. His eyes were filled with amazement. Hong Jun knew the great tribulation of heaven and earth very well. He had seen how grand and shocking the previous heavenly demon tribulation was. Naturally, he knew what the great tribulation of heaven and earth was about. The great tribulation of heaven and earth could be said to be the great tribulation of the entire world. This kind of tribulation was billions of times stronger than the tribulation that any living being had to endure to break through to the next realm. As long as a tribulation could be called the Great Tribulation of heaven and earth, it represented the death of billions of living beings, and it meant that the entire world was about to undergo a huge change. The last Great Tribulation of heaven and earth had caused one. 296 billion square days to appear in the primordial world. It had caused the endless outer realm outside the primordial world to be destroyed, causing countless strange beasts to appear in the world, and causing only a few innate gods to remain in the primordial world. One could imagine how terrifying the Great Tribulation of heaven and earth was. This time, his master actually said that the Great Tribulation of heaven and earth had arrived again. How could Hong Jun not be shocked? Seeing Hong Jun's expression, Luo Fan knew that he already understood how serious the tribulation was. He no longer described the consequences of the tribulation and only said, "This great tribulation of heaven and earth is the tribulation of humans and demons. It is the tribulation that determines the protagonist of the world in the primordial world. It was caused by the dispute between your second junior brother and sixth junior brother. At this moment, it has already developed to the extreme, and it has completely broken away from their control. As their senior brother, you have the duty to deal with the consequences that they caused." Hong Jun naturally did not dare to say that he was the eldest senior brother and Luo Fan was still their master. He only bowed and said yes. Seeing this, Luo Fan said, "If you want to deal with the aftermath, you can mend the sky here." Mend the sky. Hong Jun could not help but exclaim when he heard that. Although it was only 2 words, the meaning it represented was incomparably shocking. It could even be compared to the legendary creation of heaven and earth. If his master said that he wanted him to mend the sky, Hong Jun naturally did not dare to have any doubts. He would only admire Luo Fan. However, Luo Fan wanted him to mend the sky at this moment, which instantly broke the calmness that he had formed for hundreds of millions of years. His expression instantly changed greatly. Luo Fan smiled and said, "It's the mend of the sky." This time, the barrier between the endless starry sky and the untainted land is about to be broken, and endless stars are about to fall into the untainted land. If this barrier is not mended, when all the stars fall, there will be endless chaos pouring into the untainted land. Thus, the untainted land will be completely destroyed, and the untainted land will return to chaos. Therefore, the matter of mend the sky is extremely important. If you're not careful, the untainted land will be destroyed. You must be careful. Hearing this, Hong Jun was even more anxious. He hurriedly said, "It's not that I'm unwilling, but I'm only a half-step primordial immortal now. How can I mend the sky? Master, please understand." Luo Fan smiled and said, "Don't worry. Since I dare to let you mend the sky, I will naturally let you have the ability to mend the sky. Why worry?" Hearing Luo Fan's words, Hong Jun still had some hesitation in his heart, but he could only bow and agree. Seeing Hong Jun's expression, Luo Fan knew that Hong Jun was not very confident, so he did not say anything more. He just said, "Come over, the stars are about to fall." As he spoke, an earth-shattering thunderclap rang out above their heads. It suddenly shook the heavens. The thunderclap was so shocking that it spread across most of the untainted land in an instant, giving all the creatures in the untainted land a strange feeling that the sky was broken. At the same time as the thunderous sound rang out, the huge illusory Dongxue seemed to break through the gap between nothingness and reality, directly transforming from an illusory existence to a completely real existence, appearing incomparably real. At the same time, endless destructive powers swarmed out of the Dongxue, like hundreds of millions of waterfalls connecting the sky and the earth, rushing straight out of the Dongxue. Seeing this, Hong Jun did not dare to hesitate any longer. He took a step and directly came to Luo Fan's side. When he was 10 feet away from Luo Fan, his body seemed to instantly become a part of Luo Fan. The aura around him was completely integrated with Luo Fan's aura. There was no difference. When this change occurred, the world-shaking pressure that he had been constantly enduring since he arrived at the top of Mount Bujo, the pressure that was enough to firmly suppress his body and his life essence, to the point of almost crushing him into dust and turning him into nothingness, had completely disappeared. It made him feel as if he had returned to the Purple Cloud Palace, and he was at ease. Obviously, the moment he stepped within 10 feet of Luo Fan, everything that he endured was completely endured by Luo Fan. In other words, the moment he was 10 feet away from Luo Fan, he was already protected by Luo Fan. As long as Luo Fan was not destroyed, he would not be harmed at all. The moment he stepped within 10 feet of Luo Fan, the boundless destructive power that swarmed down from the Dongshui above him swept past them and directly blasted towards the Bujo mountain beneath their feet. This destructive power was unimaginably powerful. The space-time of the primordial world was extremely stable, and it even possessed all sorts of incredible mysteries. It made it impossible for one to distort the void before reaching the golden immortal realm. But at this moment, under this destructive power, the void was almost distorted into a torn rag. It became wrinkled and uncontrollable, causing one's vision to become extremely strange because of this distortion. The reason for this was because this destructive power wasn't just pure power. Instead, it was a law of destruction. This kind of law was even more profound than the various mysteries comprehended by the golden immortal realm. Naturally, it possessed the might of a golden immortal realm cultivator. Naturally, it could distort the space of the primordial world and destroy the void of the primordial world. Just a strand of such power was enough to make Hong Jun suffer. But at this moment, it covered the heavens and the earth, and it completely enveloped an area of hundreds of millions of kilometers. The amount had reached an indescribable level, and its might was so strong that even a primordial gold immortal realm cultivator's traces of existence would be completely erased in an instant. But at this moment, when this power swept past, Hong Jun did not feel anything unusual. He did not even feel any power from this power at all. It was as if it was just some ordinary airflow that swept past gently. Not to mention feeling any pressure, he did not even feel the slightest discomfort. Instead, he felt that it was rather cool and wonderful. When this change appeared, Hong Jun instantly understood how great the gap between him and his master was. It had already reached a state where the difference between the heavens and the earth could not be described completely. The feeling that his master was omnipotent, accumulated in the past, once again skyrocketed. Originally, this feeling that Hong Jun had was already quite strong. Now that it had skyrocketed again, it almost formed a belief like Lin Tiannan's. Just when Hong Jun had almost formed the belief that Luo Fan was omnipotent, the destructive power that swept down from the Dongshui had already directly collided with Bujo Mountain below. This collision could not even be described as Mars colliding with the Earth. In an instant, the entire primordial world shook violently. The void shattered into pieces, and countless spatial cracks spread in all directions from the point of contact. In an instant, it covered an area of billions of kilometers. Within this area, the void seemed to have turned into countless fragments. The primordial world within this area seemed to have turned into countless fragments in an instant. It became extremely strange, mysterious, and at the same time, extremely dangerous. Is the world collapsing? In an instant, Lei Jiuxiao and the others in Tianjing had this inexplicable feeling. Compared to the entire primordial world, the distance between them and Bujo Mountain was naturally extremely close. However, to be specific, it was not just a mere billions of kilometers. Therefore, although they could clearly feel the serious consequences of the destructive power colliding with Bujo Mountain, their bodies were not truly affected. The entire Tianjing was not damaged by this collision or the destruction of the void. In fact, even Luo Fu, who had entered a state of enlightenment, did not break out of it because of this shock. Instead, he seemed to have entered a deeper state of enlightenment because of this crisis. Even the aura on his body seemed to have started to continuously increase at this moment. Crack, 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 crack. Amidst the earth-shaking thunderclaps, there was a strange cracking sound that seemed to be extremely tiny that instantly spread to every inch of the void in the entire primordial world. It entered the ears of every living being in the primordial world, regardless of how complete their spiritual consciousness was or how simple it was. This sound was so tiny, but under the effect of a certain strange rule, it seemed very conspicuous. It almost instantly occupied the minds and thoughts of all living beings in the primordial world. Under some kind of mysterious guidance, the countless living beings suddenly turned their gazes to the northwest of the primordial world, where Bujo Mountain was located. In fact, almost all of the living beings were able to form a blurry or clear image in their minds due to the cracking sounds. Countless tiny cracks suddenly appeared around a towering, majestic, and boundless mountain peak that was emitting an unyielding and boundless aura. These cracks began to appear from above and then spread downward at an unimaginable speed. In just a few breaths, they had already enveloped the entire mountain from top to bottom, and even the land within a radius of billions of kilometers around the mountain. These cracking sounds were the wonderful sounds produced by these cracks as they continued to spread. That's Bujo Mountain. This thought flashed across almost every living being's mind, regardless of whether their spiritual consciousness was complete or crude. Then, an indescribable, unexplainable sorrow suddenly occupied the minds of every living being, occupying their souls and consciousness. In an instant, tears flowed from the corners of their eyes. Among these creatures, almost 99% had never shed a tear in their entire lives. There were even some creatures who couldn't shed tears who had 2 streaks of blood dripping from the corners of their eyes. They were using this extremely tragic method to vent the immense sorrow that had suddenly arisen in their hearts. At this moment, the towering Bujo Mountain, which stood directly up from the ground of the primordial world and stood against the endless starry sky barrier above it, the supreme being transformed from Pangu's spine, suddenly collapsed into countless pieces, then splashed in all directions by the inexhaustible destructive power. The moment this change occurred in the minds of all living beings, almost all living beings in the primordial world knelt down uncontrollably. Oppressed by an indescribable force, they kowtowed in the direction of Bujo Mountain. At that moment, almost every living being knew that the only body part left behind by the great god Pangu, who had supported the world and allowed the entire primordial world to maintain stability, had collapsed. With the collapse of Bujo Mountain, the entire primordial world began to shake violently. From the top to the bottom, from the inside to the outside, the inside and outside of the primordial world, as far as the time and space could reach. Even the billions of dong heavens began to shake continuously during this process. This kind of shaking was different from the previous one, which seemed like the end of the world. Instead, it was the shaking that the entire primordial world was falling apart. It was the shaking that the origin of the entire primordial world was being destroyed. Amidst the tremors, the untainted land gradually tilted. Huge cracks spread out from Mount Bujo in all directions, forming hundreds of millions of miles wide cracks. The cracks divided the entire untainted land, splitting the vast and complete untainted land into pieces. Boundless seawater poured into these cracks from all directions, causing these cracks to gradually fill with seawater. As these cracks grew larger, these cracks gradually turned into oceans. Even the land that had been split apart by the cracks was constantly cracking. These cracks weren't as big as the huge crack, but they weren't small either. They created huge canyons in the land that had been split apart, constantly splitting it apart. The whole process was unimaginably fast. The speed at which the cracks split was faster than the speed of any living being's escape light. The distance of hundreds of millions of miles was almost crossed in an instant. In just a few breaths, the division of the earth and the formation of countless cracks had completely taken shape. Bujo Mountain was formed by Pangu's backbone. It was the backbone of the primordial world that Pangu had painstakingly created to support the primordial world. He wanted to maintain the harmony between the primordial world and the heaven and earth, so that the primordial world could exist forever. The collapse of Bujo Mountain was the most tragic and the greatest damage to the entire primordial world. It was second only to the destruction of the entire primordial world. Chapter 683. The primordial world, which was connected to the endless starry sky and the untainted land by the boundless destructive power, was located at the top of Bujo Mountain. First written text, free ebook download. This was because Bujo Mountain was a pillar that held up the entire endless starry sky, preventing it from collapsing. Its top was naturally the place closest to the endless starry sky in the entire untainted land. Under such circumstances, the barrier between the endless starry sky and the untainted land was the easiest place to be broken. How could it be any other place? Although the huge passageway that Luo Fan had set up around the hole with his boundless Dharma power had the ability to distort time and space, it would take a primordial unity cultivator thousands of years to cross this incredible distance. But that was only under normal circumstances. At this moment, under the pressure of the boundless destructive power in the endless starry sky, this distance was not so absolute. The destructive power that erupted from the endless stars in the endless starry sky was so strong that it could even turn the entire untainted land back into chaos. How could it be so easily restrained? Although the passageway that Luo Fan had formed with his boundless Dharma power had a vast and mysterious power that could even distort time and space and evolve a world, it could not completely safely make the destructive power obey the rules it had set. Amidst the accumulation of the infinite destructive power, the originally extremely long passageway did not shrink at all, and its capacity for the destructive power did not weaken in the slightest. However, it did not have much effect on the speed of the destructive power. The destructive power could originally only spread and fly at the speed of a primordial unity cultivator in the outside world, but in this passageway, it directly surged at a speed that was tens of thousands of times faster than that of a primordial unity cultivator in the outside world. With such a rushing speed, it only took Luo Fan a short period of time to pass through the passageway, which would have taken the destructive power thousands of years to pass through, but only took the destructive power a short period of time after Luo Fan arrived in the untainted land. Such a destructive power that was able to distort the laws of the passage constructed by Luo Fan's infinite magical power. One could imagine how powerful it was. Although a lot of the explosive power had been worn down in the process, and it had become much more docile than when it had first entered the passage, it would not directly explode and destroy the entire untainted land into chaos. However, it was impossible for it to completely lose its destructive power. Therefore, the whole Bujo Mountain had been directly blasted into pieces, and the entire untainted land had collapsed. This result was already what Luo Fan could do at the moment, and it was also the limit required by the Supreme Great Tao. The endless destructive power was greatly reduced by the passage. Therefore, after destroying Bujo Mountain, it did not continue to blast downwards. Instead, it began to disperse in all directions from the top of Bujo Mountain, venting to the entire untainted land. The top of Bujo Mountain was the top of the Gangwind, Thunder, and Fire layer. The entrance of this passage was hundreds of millions of miles in diameter, and had long surpassed the original range of the Gangwind, Thunder, and Fire layer that was originally affected by Bujo Mountain. Therefore, the destructive power that was venting in all directions began to wreak havoc in the Gangwind, Thunder, and Fire layer. The speed of the destructive power had reached an unimaginable level. In the untainted land, the strength of the laws was much stronger and more stable than the Dharma power passageway that Luo Fan had built. This was because the restriction on the destructive power was naturally much stronger than in the passageway. And this strength made the destructive power in the untainted land not as fast as it was in the passageway. But even so, its speed was hundreds or thousands of times faster than that of ordinary primordial unity gold cultivators. At this speed, the destructive power would not take too long to travel across the entire untainted land. It would only take a few years, but it would be enough to travel across the entire untainted land, which would take countless years for a primordial unity gold cultivator. This speed was already shockingly fast compared to the time it would take to travel across the untainted land that would take tens of thousands of years. Free ebook download. Although the destructive power would take a few years to travel across the entire untainted land, its influence would spread across the entire untainted land at a speed that was many times faster than the destructive power. This was because the destructive power was acting on the gangwind, thunder, and fire layer. The gangwind, thunder, and fire layer was a defensive entity above the void of the untainted land. It was self-contained, and the gangwind, thunder, and fire condensed into one in an extremely subtle way, enveloping the entire sky of the untainted land. It could be said that all the gangwind, thunder, and fire layers in the sky of the untainted land were connected to each other, affecting each other, and even communicating with each other through various unbelievable methods. Since it was a whole, the damage to a certain part would naturally be transmitted. When the range of damage reached a certain level, it would naturally affect the entire thing. At this moment, the endless destructive power bombarded the gangwind, thunder, and fire layer. Naturally, it caused a portion of the gangwind, thunder, and fire layer that was affected by the destructive power to instantly collapse. From its incomparably complete and stable state, it suddenly turned into countless wandering gangwind, thunder, and fire. Most of them were directly annihilated by the endless destructive power. Only a very, very small portion broke out and fell from the sky, crazily pouring towards the untainted land below. Although the gangwind, thunder, and fire that poured down from the gangwind, thunder, and fire layer was only an extremely small portion of the gangwind, thunder, and fire layer. In terms of absolute quantity, it had already reached an unimaginable level. In an instant, the area that was enveloped by the destructive power turned into a world of gangwind, thunder, and fire. The endless gangwind, thunder, and fire almost filled the entire untainted land to the gangwind, thunder, and fire layer above the untainted land, causing the entire world to seem to be completely constructed from gangwind, thunder, and fire. At the beginning, this change could only affect the portion of the gangwind, thunder, and fire layer that was directly enveloped by the destructive power. However, as time passed, the endless destructive power continued to spread. At a certain moment, when the destructive power expanded to a radius of 129,600 trillion kilometers, the power of the destructive power began to spread. The huge gangwind, thunder, and fire layer above the untainted land that had completely enveloped the untainted land began to gradually tremble. Subsequently, like sand piling up, the entire gangwind, thunder, and fire layer began to collapse with the destructive power at the center. The speed of the collapse was unimaginable, as if there was no process at all. In the blink of an eye, it had covered every inch of the gangwind, thunder, and fire layer in the entire untainted land. Of course, there was a difference. The closer one was to the center of the destructive power, the faster and more intense the rate of collapse. The further one was from the center, the lighter the degree of collapse. However, the amount of gangwind, thunder, and fire contained within the gangwind, thunder, and fire layer was endless. Even if there was a slight collapse, it was enough to pour out endless gangwind, thunder, and fire that covered the sky and earth. It covered the entire space between the gangwind, thunder, and fire layer. Just the slight collapse of the wind, lightning, and fire layer was already able to create such a scene. Those areas that were closer to the center of the annihilation force, but were outside the range of the annihilation force, were directly destroyed. It was as though the world was collapsing. Even the empty space had become distorted and shattered. Even time seemed to have become slightly distorted. The endless gangwind, thunder, and fire was the most powerful destructive power. As it poured down from all directions, it was extremely destructive to everything in the untainted land. As for the living creatures and the endless cultivators, this destructive power was even more shocking and terrifying. It had to be known that when cultivators cultivated to a certain level, they would encounter heavenly tribulations. Most of these heavenly tribulations were formed in the form of gang wind, thunder, and fire. There were even many heavenly tribulations that directly broke open a small hole in the gang wind, thunder, and fire, and allowed some gang wind, thunder, and fire to pour out. Under such circumstances, the damage that the gang wind, thunder, and fire could cause to cultivators and living creatures could be imagined. Under the cover of the endless gang wind, thunder, and fire, 99% of the living creatures in the untainted land, except for some of the more powerful cities, more complete caves, and more strange terrains, were instantly killed. Among them, most of them were from the demon clan, or rather, they were the previous incarnations of the demon clan, the strange beasts that had just appeared in the untainted land more than 100 yuanhui ago. After all, there were too many strange beasts. Although the number of each kind of strange beast could not be compared to the number of humans, the total number of strange beasts was almost millions of times that of the human clan. Although there were so many strange beasts, most of them were muddle-headed. They only relied on their innate talent and their own physical strength to survive and forage for food. They did not know how to cultivate, did not know how to seek Tao, and did not have a complete spiritual consciousness. How could they resist the endless gang wind, thunder, and fire that fell from the sky? It was natural for them to be directly erased from the world. The gang wind, thunder, and fire wiped out living creatures on a large scale and destroyed the terrain of the untainted land on a large scale. Naturally, there would not be any special care, and no living seeds would be left behind. Therefore, in the process, most of the strange beasts went extinct because of the overwhelming gang wind, thunder, and fire. The remaining strange beasts that did not go extinct were also very few. An extremely small number of fire seeds remained in various parts of the untainted land. They either hid or survived by relying on their cultivation. In the untainted land, there were two camps that had been fighting each other for more than 100 yuanhui. The endless cities and the many complete caves naturally did not belong to the human clan. In fact, many of them belonged to the demon clan. However, because the living habits of the demon clan were different from those of the human clan, they still retained a lot of wild nature. Most of them liked to live in the natural world and did not like to live in restricted cities. Therefore, the demon clan cities were much fewer than the human clan cities. They only took up 10% of all the cities. As a result, the demon clan's losses were countless times greater than those of the human clan. At this moment, if all the phenomena stopped, the demon clan would no longer have any chance of winning. Lei Jiuxiao did not need to admit defeat. He would have lost. Luo Fan floated in the middle of the endless destructive power. As he opened and closed his eyes, all the changes in the untainted land were completely absorbed by him. When he sensed all of this, even with Luo Fan's supreme Tao heart, he could not help but sigh slightly. Unlike the deaths of the many cultivators in the endless starry sky, the impact from the collapse of the gang wind, thunder, and fire layer had killed more than billions of living beings in the untainted land. He could ignore the deaths of hundreds of thousands of cultivators in the endless starry sky and not invest any emotions in them. But he still could not calmly face the fact that 99% of the living beings in the untainted land had died in an instant, even though he knew that he could not change this process. With a slight sigh, Luo Fan raised his hand and covered it. His right sleeve directly crossed the void, and, in the process, it became extremely huge. In an instant, it arrived above Tianjing, which was enduring the impact of the boundless gales, lightning, and fire. In an instant, it covered the entire Tianjing, which had already been absorbed into his sleeve universe. Luo Fan had started cultivating the universe in the sleeve ever since he entered the Tao. As his cultivation level increased, the universe in the sleeve had become more powerful. At this moment, the universe in the sleeve had reached an unimaginable level. Not to mention Tianjing, it was extremely easy to put an object that was tens of thousands of times larger than Tianjing into the sleeve. I'll save as many as I can. Such a thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind. After this thought flashed through his mind, he casually waved his sleeve and collected the many cities not very far away from Buzhou Mountain. After that, he did not let go of the Demon Clan cities. He also collected some of the more prosperous Demon Clan cities into his sleeve. Among them, he naturally put Guling, Lin Tiannan, and the others into his sleeve. In a short while, he had collected more than 120,000 cities into his sleeve. The number of living beings in these cities added up to trillions. Such a number of living beings compared to the entire untainted world was naturally like a drop in the ocean. However, it had already reached the limit that Luo Fan could do at this moment. It should be known that each city was tens of thousands of miles wide. Within them, there were countless materials and resources. More than 120,000 such cities piled up in one place would be billions of miles wide. After all, the universe in the sleeve was only a kind of divine power. It was already inconceivable for it to be able to collect so many cities. How could he ask for more? Unfortunately, there is always a loss for every gain. Although the limitless Void Palace has merged with me and completely separated itself from the untainted world, it has transcended the shackles and obtained freedom. However, it is also because of this that the limitless Void Palace cannot wantonly collect the materials of the untainted world. Otherwise, perhaps more living beings could survive. Luo Fan knew that he had reached his limit. He sighed to himself and stopped moving. At this moment, everything in the untainted world was drowned by the endless wind, lightning, and fire. It was almost impossible to see any traces of the untainted world. This kind of phenomenon caused the entire untainted world to tremble constantly. The changes that occurred in the untainted world were not much different from the end of the world. Right at this moment, another heaven-shaking thunderclap resounded. This thunderous sound was not the sound produced by the opening of the passageway, nor was it the sound produced when the endless destructive power collided with Buzhou Mountain. Instead, it was a strange sound of friction. This sound of friction seemed to be produced by an unknown, incomparably huge existence with endless, incredible energy rubbing against each other and squeezing some gas. Although Hong Jun was already a half-step primordial immortal, there was still a huge gap between him and Luo Fan. Just now, when Luo Fan repeatedly waved his sleeves and disappeared into the void, he did not see clearly why Luo Fan did that, nor could he see what mysteries were contained in his technique. He only knew that every time he waved his sleeves, it seemed to cause the endless space-time to change, producing all kinds of unimaginable mysterious effects. And it was under such circumstances that the strange, thunderous sound that suddenly fell from the sky and suppressed all the sounds produced in the untainted world at this moment instantly shifted his attention from Luo Fan to the void above. When he looked up, an indescribable shock appeared in his eyes. Above his head, at the exit of the huge passageway that was hundreds of millions of miles in diameter, a huge star was slowly squeezing out of it. The star was unimaginably huge. Although the exit of the passageway was hundreds of millions of miles in diameter, it was still extremely small compared to the star. With a gentle squeeze from the star, it was instantly expanded by tens of thousands of times. From being in the passageway originally, it seemed that the entire passageway had been replaced by the star, which was tens of thousands of times larger than the passageway. If the passageway was not protected by Luo Fan's endless magic power, perhaps the star would have caused the passageway to collapse and disappear. It would not be like this. Although it had been expanded by tens of thousands of times, it still maintained the integrity of the passageway and did not collapse because of the appearance of the star. At first glance, the star seemed to be squeezing out very slowly, but that was in terms of the scale of the star. Compared to ordinary creatures, the speed of the star's compression had already reached an unimaginable level. Just as the shock in Hong Jun's eyes appeared, before it could dissipate, the star had already passed through the passageway and crushed down on his body. Being crushed by such an enormous star that blotted out the heavens and the earth, even Hong Jun's heart couldn't help but skip a beat. Although he forcefully restrained himself from crying out, the earthly immortal's Tao fruit that carried a tiny bit of primordial unity in his body had already collapsed with a bang, transforming into a strand of magic power that charged out of his body. Hashtag free ebook download. Chapter 684. However, at the moment when Hongjuan's magic power rushed out of his acupuncture points, the huge star had already crushed his body. First text, full text, no advertisement during this process. Hongjun didn't feel anything at all. It was as if the gigantic star was just a shadow, a completely illusory object. This, because Hongjuan's boundless magic power missed. He felt an indescribable emptiness in his heart. Fortunately, he was a half-step primordial immortal, and he had long been able to control his magic power as he pleased. The emptiness only appeared for a moment, and was completely suppressed by him. Then, with a thought, he withdrew all the magic power into his body, and condensed it into a mysterious, earthly, immortal Tao fruit in his body. But it barely did not affect Luo Fan, who was beside him to protect him. Of course, Luo Fan could only bear the bombardment of all his magic power without resisting, and he would not be hurt at all. Master's ability is indeed so incredible. At this moment, this was the only thought that flashed through Hongjuan's mind. At this moment, such a situation had clearly occurred because Luo Fan's protection had completely brought Hongjun into another mysterious time and space. Although it seemed to be in the untainted world, in fact, it was completely separated from the untainted world. No matter what kind of physical or non-physical attack there was in the untainted world, it could not hurt him. Although Hongjun had once considered this kind of protection magic, he knew that he absolutely could not do it. Even if he exhausted all his imagination and raised his cultivation realm to the limit that he could imagine, he could not have absolute confidence that he could do it. Luo Fan stood beside Hongjun and naturally saw all the changes in Hongjun. He did not need to hide his thoughts towards his disciple, so he directly praised him. Your reaction is quite fast. It seems that you have not forgotten to train your reflexes all these years. Right at this moment, the enormous star had already crashed into the ground. With a loud bang, the entire untainted land shook violently in an instant. The endless astral wind, lightning, and fire that blotted out the sky and covered the earth suddenly paused at this moment. Then they began to explode in all directions from where the star was, forming an extremely vast vacuum around the star. The distance between the heavens and the earth of the primordial world was only 100,000 kilometers, but the diameter of a star was more than 100,000 kilometers. Such a star fell from the endless starry sky. When one end of the star touched the ground, the star in the entire untainted land was only an extremely huge, almost flat arc. Such a huge star crashed into the great desolate land at an unimaginable speed. One could imagine how great the impact was. However, it was clear that although the primordial world seemed as fragile as a piece of paper when Mount Bujo collapsed and instantly split into pieces, its sturdiness was not something an ordinary star could compare to. As a result, when the planet collided with the ground, the gigantic planet that only revealed a huge arc in the primordial world could not withstand the impact at all. It cracked and collapsed with a bang. Countless fragments of the planet flew in all directions. The power of the splatter had reached an unimaginable level, causing the speed of the splatter to reach an earth-shattering level. In an instant, with the point of collision as the center, countless sharp sounds and earth-shattering roars could be heard, and countless gigantic pieces of the stars tore through the void, heading towards various parts of the primordial world. Although the entire untainted land was huge and the surface area of the land was almost limitless, the star was just too big, and the force of the collision was just too strong. Therefore, although it was on such a vast land, the impact of the collision and the aftermath of the collision directly affected the entire primordial world. The countless fragments of the stars cut through the void and almost reached the end of the primordial world. Those stars were condensed from some kind of extremely special star stone, and every star stone was formed from the condensation of an endless amount of star essence in one place. When the star fragments shot out in all directions, the star stones were constantly being rubbed and worn down. The essence of the stars contained in them continuously dissipated and fused with the endless vitality of the untainted land, continuously increasing the concentration of vitality in the untainted land. After all, the star was incomparably huge. Although the untainted land was extremely hard and could shatter the star during the collision with the star, causing the star fragments to shoot out in all directions, it was impossible for the untainted land to remain unscathed. Many cracks appeared at the point of collision. At the same time, the land also caused the lower layer of the entire untainted land, the land and the ocean, to sink slightly. This process caused the distance between the untainted land to finally exceed 100,000 kilometers. Although it only exceeded a few kilometers, it had already broken through the limit. The star continued to shatter, but it still continued to hit the ground. Each collision caused it to shatter at an unimaginable speed, and each collision caused the lower layer of the untainted land to sink continuously, causing the distance between the untainted land and the untainted land to increase continuously. The concentration of the vitality in the untainted land was already extremely rich, but with the sudden increase of the star essence, it finally broke through a certain limit. The vitality gradually condensed into clouds. Obviously, the gaseous state could no longer accommodate such a concentration of vitality. As the star continued to fall, the density of the clouds continued to increase. The falling speed of the star was extremely fast. It only took less than 2 hours for the entire earth-shattering star to completely fall. The entire star had been completely shattered, and most of it had turned into star essence that fused into the void. Only a very small number of extremely hard and special star fragments could maintain their solid form and not be worn down and turned into chi. However, this was not the end. When the star was completely shattered, another star that was several times bigger than the previous one directly squeezed through the entrance of the passage and fell into the untainted land. This time, the falling speed was faster, the power was stronger, and the impact on the untainted land was also stronger. At the same time, these changes also caused the star to shatter even faster, and the degree of shattering also became even more shocking. The speed at which it turned into star essence was naturally faster. When a star was completely shattered and turned into star essence, the lower layer of the untainted land sank another dozens of kilometers, and the density of the clouds became several times denser. After this star, stars continued to fall one after another. 10 stars, 100 stars, 1,000 stars. The energy contained in the stars of the untainted land was astonishing. It could be seen from the fact that they could hang high in the void since the beginning of the world, constantly emitting endless star essence into the endless starry sky, into the untainted land, and provide countless living beings with endless years of cultivation. The energy contained in a star was completely integrated into the untainted land. The effect was so strong that it was beyond imagination. The integration of almost every star was enough to increase the density of the primordial chi in the untainted land by 10%. 10 stars were enough to double the density of the primordial chi in the untainted land. 100 stars was 10 times, 1,000 stars was 100 times, and 10,000 stars was 1,000 times. As for the untainted land, every star was enough to knock the lower layer of the untainted land down dozens of kilometers. 10 stars were hundreds of kilometers, 100 stars were thousands of kilometers, 1,000 stars were tens of thousands of kilometers, and 10,000 stars were hundreds of thousands of kilometers. Under such circumstances, one star after another fell into the primordial world. One could imagine how great the impact was. One had to know that the number of stars in the endless starry sky had reached a level that could not be clearly described with numbers. If numbers could not describe it clearly, it meant that it might not be able to be clearly calculated even with trillions or tens of trillions of calculations. When things reach an extreme, they would change. The increase in the density of the primordial chi naturally had countless benefits to living beings. However, when it increased to a certain level, it would become the most fatal existence to all living beings. After more than 100,000 stars fell into the untainted land, The density of the primordial chi in the untainted land had increased to tens of thousands of times its original density. Such a density could no longer be contained by the gaseous state. It had already turned into a liquid state and began to flow wantonly in the untainted land. The pressure produced by this liquid state was even comparable to the pressure endured at the top of Buzhou Mountain. How many living beings in the world could withstand the pressure at the top of Buzhou Mountain? Therefore, after these hundreds of thousands of stars fell into the primordial world, other than the trillions of living beings that Luo Fan had taken into his sleeve, almost all of the other living beings in the primordial world were crushed to death by this pressure. Only a very small number of living beings were sealed and sunk into a special location, not knowing if they were lucky or not. At this time, the number of stars in the endless starry sky did not show any signs of decreasing. They were still endless and still could not be described with numbers. At this time, Luo Fan turned his head and said to Hong Jun, "Well, things have come to this. You can't wait any longer. The matter of mending the sky must be carried out immediately. Otherwise, it will be difficult for me to reverse the fate of the untainted land." At this time, the harsh environment in the untainted land was the most dangerous and almost uninhabitable environment for other cultivators. But for Hong Jun, who was a half-step primordial immortal, it was nothing. He did not even need to rely on magic treasures to survive in it. When Hong Jun heard Luo Fan's words, he quickly said solemnly, "Master, please tell me what you want. I will obey." Luo Fan nodded and pointed a finger. A speck of spiritual light rushed out of his hand and went directly to Hong Jun's forehead. Without hesitation, Hong Jun's body trembled, and an invisible suction was produced between his eyebrows, sucking the spiritual light directly into it. It went through his mud-pill palace, rushed into his sea of consciousness, and fused with his divine soul. The moment the spiritual light fused with his divine soul, it exploded and turned into countless information, allowing Hong Jun to instantly understand all kinds of incredible divine abilities and incredible power. The materials needed to mend the sky are not ordinary. Only a world can block the sky. Use the method I taught you to collect the 296 billion square meters of grotto heavens. It must not take more than a yuan wei. After a yuan wei, come back here to mend the sky, Luo Fan directly ordered. Although the battle between Luo Fu and Lei Jiuxiao had destroyed many grotto heavens, the origin of the grotto heavens still existed in the original location of the grotto heavens. After all, the grotto heavens were born from a supreme great Tao of the primordial world. With the cultivation of itinerant, immortal, perfected immortal, and even golden immortal, it was naturally impossible for them to destroy the grotto heavens' origin. It was already very rare to be able to destroy the form of the grotto heavens. In other words, this kind of destruction could not be considered true destruction. It was just making the original form of the grotto heavens disappear, allowing it to start brewing another form. If the great tribulation of heaven and earth did not appear, then after a few years, these grotto heavens would definitely be born again. However, the form would not be the same as before. It was because of this reason that Luo Fan could let Hong Jun collect 296 billion square meters of grotto heavens. Hong Jun sensed the information that appeared in his soul, and he already knew that it was the various exquisite methods to refine the world and collect the world, as well as the specific location of the 296 billion square meters of grotto heavens in the primordial world. He could not help but be excited and anxious. He did not dare to say anything else and said, "Yes, master." As he spoke, he bowed, turned around, and strode into the void. At the same time, he activated the void shifting ability of the Purple Cloud Palace. His figure instantly disappeared in front of Luo Fan, and he went to collect the grotto heavens. A yuan hui was 129,600 years. To completely collect the 296 billion square meters of grotto heavens in this period of time, he needed to collect an average of 10,000 square meters of grotto heavens every year. In other words, he needed to collect an average of nearly 30 grotto heavens every day No matter how he calculated it, time was extremely tight. How could Hong Jun delay any action? It was naturally impossible for Hong Jun to collect nearly 30 grotto heavens in a day. After all, one could imagine how exquisite the supernatural power of refining the world and collecting the world was. No matter how good Hong Jun's aptitude was, it was impossible for him to do it quickly and well. He must have practiced for a long time before he could fully master this supernatural power. Therefore, in the beginning, it was impossible for Hong Jun's speed to reach the requirement. However, it was obvious that as Hong Jun became more and more familiar with this divine ability and perfected it, the speed at which he collected the world would become faster and faster. In the end, it might far exceed the requirement of nearly 30 grotto heavens every day. Therefore, although time was tight, it was not completely impossible for Hong Jun. As long as he used all his strength, he would definitely be able to do it. As long as he used all his strength to refine the world and collect the world, his mastery of the great Tao would become deeper and more perfect. The possibility of achieving Tai would naturally be countless times stronger than cultivating in the Purple Cloud Palace. Therefore, it could be considered as an opportunity that Luo Fan had given Hong Jun. If you can't achieve Tai Dao fruit in this process, then the following sky mending will be an extremely difficult experience. It will definitely allow you to achieve Tai Scatter. If you can't even achieve Tai after sky mending, then you're definitely not the real Hong Jun. Such a thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind. After this thought, Luo Fan did not stay there. He turned around and sank down. In the blink of an eye, he crossed the distance between the heavens and the earth and came to the depths of the earth, where the yellow springs were. In the blink of an eye, the yellow springs had already undergone shocking changes due to the various changes that had occurred in the primordial world. The entire yellow spring had long been fragmented, and the huge underground network that covered the entire great desolate world had already become extremely chaotic. It was as if the originally extremely smooth threads had been crazily stirred by a huge hand, forming a mess. Luo Fan sensed carefully and heaved a sigh of relief. Although the entire yellow springs seemed to be fragmented, that was only what it looked like. In reality, all the places that seemed to be broken and completely separated from the other sections of the yellow springs still had small, extremely fine streams connecting them. This allowed the entire yellow springs to barely maintain its integrity. It could still be considered a complete yellow springs. However, that was all. More than 90% of the countless living beings in the yellow springs had already died. As for the remaining 10%, they were like birds that were startled by the mere twang of a bowstring. They constantly charged around in the yellow springs section in fear, making it extremely chaotic. The yellow springs had become like this. The virtual world that was rooted in the Yellow Springs network had naturally undergone a huge change. The virtual world existed in the form of the void of the universe. The void of the universe was boundless, and there were countless stars in it. There were even more living beings living in the stars. Most of these living beings were naturally born from the virtual world. However, a small portion of them were reincarnated from the living beings that had died in the past 100 years of the primordial world. This process was not an absolute process. In other words, not all living beings in the primordial world had the chance to reincarnate into the virtual world after they died. Only an extremely small number of special creatures, cultivators, or creatures with relatively perfect spiritual awareness could reincarnate into this virtual world after death. Even if they were reincarnated, their memories would have long since disappeared, and only their life imprints would remain. Therefore, although the virtual world could accommodate the life imprints of the living beings who had died, it only accounted for a very small portion of the countless living beings who had died in the primordial world at that moment. The change in the virtual world was that the entire void of the virtual world had been divided into countless sections. Between each section, there were only small, tiny voids that were connected to each other. The silver lining in the misfortune was that the entire virtual world was unimaginably vast. Most of the locations were empty space, so although it was divided into countless regions, only a small portion of the planets were destroyed, and there were only a few planets that had life. Hashtag free ebook download. Chapter 685. The vastness of the virtual world was even greater than that of the primordial world. Even in the primordial world, it was considered extremely rare. Very few life imprints had reincarnated into this virtual world. It was even more rare, to the point where one could not be found in a light year. Sensing the changes in the virtual world, Luo Fan could no longer hesitate. With a slight thought, his consciousness returned to his body. At this moment, the stars falling from the endless starry sky were still continuously falling. One after another, the stars continued to bombard the ground. The impact could shatter such a huge star into countless pieces, and even turn those pieces into countless star essence. One could imagine how strong the impact was. Although this place was extremely deep underground, one could still clearly feel the tremors. Every time the stars collided, it was as if a giant hand had reached out from where Luo Fan was and grabbed the Netherworld network, causing it to shake violently. And every time this shaking happened, the already fragmented Netherworld network would become even more fragmented and fragmented. Fortunately, the existence of the Netherworld network was in line with the most subtle and mysterious mysteries of the Supreme Great Tao. As long as the Supreme Great Tao of the primordial world was not truly destroyed, the Netherworld network would not be completely cut off. Therefore, no matter how fragmented it became, every seemingly broken section of the Netherworld network would have tiny threads of the Netherworld network extending out and connecting to other sections of the Netherworld network, allowing the entire Netherworld network to barely maintain its existence in the form of a network. And it was precisely because of this strange characteristic that the virtual world built by Luo Fan was constantly divided into more and more sections. But it did not directly perish because of the fragmentation of the Netherworld network. However, this was almost the limit. A world might not need to be completely balanced, but a general and relative balance was absolutely indispensable. For example, the distance between the sky and the earth and the thickness of the earth might not need to be completely equal, but the difference between them must not be too great. At this moment, in the untainted land, the distance between the sky and the earth, as well as the lower levels of the untainted land, had increased to millions of miles. However, the thickness of the untainted land was still the same as before. It was only 90,000 miles. Below 90,000 miles was the boundless blood sea and the 18 hells. The distance between heaven and earth and the thickness of the earth were already 10 times different. No matter how one tried to differentiate such a gap, it was definitely a huge gap. This huge gap could be said to be the limit that the primordial world could withstand. If the gap got bigger, then what awaited Wild World was a total collapse. Wild World's great Tao and stay up late would be destroyed. Everything in and out of Wild World would be melted into the chaos outside. It would be assimilated, and then it would disappear. If that happened, even Luo Fan, who had already obtained the Zenith Heaven Tao fruit and achieved the Zenith Heaven Tao dispersing Tao, would not be able to survive. His body and Tao would disappear, and his soul would be destroyed. Although this process could not develop too quickly, there must be a process, and there was still a long time to react. However, as long as this limit was broken, the difficulty of turning the situation around would instantly increase by more than 10,000 times. Luo Fan had no choice but to be cautious. Luo Fan naturally did not leave all of this for now. In fact, at the instant he stepped out of the Everlasting Palace, he'd already seen through everything in an instant, and it was even to the extent that he'd already thought of all sorts of countermeasures. Because of this, he was so calm and could even order Hong Jun to collect the 296 billion square worlds to mend the sky. At this moment, Luo Fan, who knew that the time had come, did not hesitate at all. With a thought, he raised his hand and grabbed the origin of the Yellow Springs network, which was also its core. When Luo Fan saw the origin of the Yellow Springs network, he knew that it was only half-formed. Its next evolution had to be pushed down Buzhou Mountain and make the suppression of Buzhou Mountain completely disappear. At this moment, Buzhou Mountain had already collapsed, and the origin of the Yellow Springs network had begun to change drastically. If this kind of change was normal, it would be enough to cause the entire primordial world to react violently. However, at this moment, when there were endless stars falling from the endless void and bombarding the primordial world, it seemed so insignificant. In fact, it seemed so untimely. After all, the primordial world was about to be destroyed. What was the point of the Yellow Springs network evolving completely? Luo Fan looked at the core that was undergoing intense changes. He shook his head and sighed. With a casual grab, an invisible force appeared out of nowhere and instantly acted on the core. This force was unimaginably powerful and indescribably mysterious. Under its effect, the core of the Yellow Springs network instantly stopped evolving. It even returned to its original form and continued to condense. In the end, it condensed into a small, strange pearl that was only the size of a fist. Within this bead, there were countless strange threads floating out. The further these threads were from the pearl, the larger they were. When they were a few tens of thousands of kilometers away from the pearl, they'd already enlarged into numerous wide rivers, and the nether springs that were condensed from boundless een and muddy energy flowed within them. Clearly, these threads were the tributaries of the Yellow Springs. Luo Fan casually waved his hand, and the pearl landed in his hand. In an instant, an unimaginably heavy pressure came from his hand. At this moment, Luo Fan felt like he was not holding a pearl in his hand, but hundreds of millions of mountains. The pressure was so great that even with his cultivation at the peak of the Daluo dispersing Dao realm, his supreme self-sufficient body, and his earth-shattering power, he still felt somewhat unable to bear it. Even his entire arm felt like it was about to be broken from the shoulder by the pressure. Good fellow. Luo Fan could not help but praise. With a slight thought, the world in his sea of consciousness shook slightly. A mysterious force was born from the world and directly acted on the pearl. With the effect of this mysterious force, the earth-shattering weight of the pearl instantly disappeared. In the blink of an eye, the pearl seemed to have no weight at all, almost like an illusion. However, in that instant, Luo Fan directly let his sea of consciousness, which had already turned into reality, produce a strange guiding force and directly guided the earth-shaking and earth-shattering power of the pearl into his sea of consciousness. The weight of the pearl was like hundreds of millions of mountains. For a single living being, even for Luo Fan, who was at the peak of the Daluo, dispersing Dao, it was almost an unbearable weight. It was even enough to hurt Luo Fan's body. However, this power was nothing compared to a world. Which complete world, even if it was a minor kiliacosm, did not have hundreds of millions of mountains. Moreover, the world in Luo Fan's sea of consciousness was completely opened up in nothingness. It was vast and boundless, and its essence was even higher than that of a minor kiliacosm. For it, this weight was no pressure at all. When it was spread out, it did not even affect the world in the slightest. After transferring the weight, Luo Fan's endless thoughts were directly poured into the core of the Yellow Springs through his palm. After countless mysterious and indescribable changes, the countless threads that floated out from the pearl quickly spread outwards towards the entire network of the Yellow Springs. The speed of thoughts was not limited to all the rules of the world. As long as the heart was there, the thoughts could arrive in an instant. Therefore, as more and more thoughts were poured into the pearl by Luo Fan, the area of the Yellow Springs network covered by the thoughts spread wider and wider. To Luo Fan, who had the Daluo dispersal Dao, everything he had was self-sufficient. His body would naturally produce the corresponding thoughts to replenish the consumption of the thoughts. Therefore, no matter how much thoughts he poured into the pearl, he did not feel exhausted at all, nor did he show any signs of fatigue. When Luo Fan had completed the Daluo dispersal Dao, his perception could already cover the entire primordial world. Even if he could only sense a rough outline beyond a certain range, it already meant that Luo Fan's thoughts could reach the entire primordial world. Therefore, as long as his thoughts were enough, he could spread them to the furthest place the Yellow Springs network at the end of the primordial world. He did not need any time or any process of spreading. The entire primordial world was simply too big. Even without the process of spreading, as long as enough thoughts were poured in, it took Luo Fan several years to completely spread his thoughts to the entire Yellow Springs network and completely incorporate it into his thoughts. The Yellow Springs network had already been refined by Luo Fan when he created the virtual world. It already carried much of his aura. However, the refinement back then was only to establish a mysterious connection with the entire Yellow Springs network, allowing him to borrow the power of the Yellow Springs network to support the existence of the virtual world. His control over the Yellow Springs network was almost zero. At this moment, he had incorporated the entire Yellow Springs network into his thoughts. His control over the Yellow Springs network had increased to an unbelievable level. When his control reached this level, to a certain extent, it could even be said that the entire Yellow Springs network was a part of his body. Clearly, with Luo Fan's supreme cultivation realm at the peak of the zenith heaven dispelling Tao, his control over his own body had already reached a level where he could do as he pleased. Therefore, as he continued to incorporate the Yellow Springs network into his thoughts, hundreds of thousands of stars fell into the primordial world, increasing the distance between the primordial world and the primordial world by millions of kilometers. The density of the primordial world's vitality increased by tens of thousands of times, far exceeding the limit of the collapse of the primordial world. However, under the control of Luo Fan's thoughts, the entire primordial world did not collapse. It still barely maintained its complete state. The reason for this was that Luo Fan's thoughts contained the endless mysteries of the zenith heaven. It naturally emitted a suppressive aura, and as it continued to spread, it gradually increased the tolerance of the primordial world towards this imbalance. Of course, this increase was only temporary. If Luo Fan directly released his thoughts, the tolerance limit would naturally weaken again, causing the entire primordial world to collapse at a speed that was countless times faster than before. Luo Fan was naturally aware of this. Without any hesitation, with a thought, the will that had fused with the entire Yellow Springs network gave birth to endless control power. Almost every inch of the Yellow Springs network began to twist and climb. Under his control, the fragmented Yellow Springs network seemed to have become a living thing. Almost every inch of the Yellow Springs network began to twist and climb. From an extremely macroscopic point of view, this kind of twisting and climbing was like a normal living being's wound healing at an unimaginable speed. During this process, the fragmented Yellow Springs network began to gradually heal. The originally broken sections of the Yellow Springs network began to merge with each other, constantly approaching each other. Not long after, it condensed into an incomparably complete, mysterious, and complicated Yellow Springs network. As the Yellow Springs network condensed, the virtual world that was rooted in the Yellow Springs network also underwent a huge change. The originally separated sections continuously merged together at an unbelievable speed. Not long after, the virtual world once again became a complete and flawless void of the universe. When all these changes were completed, Luo Fan suddenly felt his mind rise endlessly. In a trance, he seemed to have transformed into the entire primordial world. His body was infinitely vast, incomparably sturdy, and contained endless power. However, at every moment, there were similarly huge, extremely sturdy stars that contained endless power descending from the sky and bombarding his body. Every bombardment was like a huge hammer falling from the sky and directly smashing into his head. This caused his entire body and mind to tremble violently. He even felt as if his mind was about to collapse. At this time, even though Luo Fan's mind was complete and firm, even though his cultivation realm was already at the peak of Daluo, scattered Tao, his expression could not help but constantly change. Every time the stars above collided with him, his body would twitch and his body would stiffen and relax. Fortunately, Luo Fan's mind was complete and flawless. Not long after, he recovered. His body became calm again, and his expression became calm again. Although the impact still existed and continued to affect his mind, it no longer had any effect on his mind. It was as if it was just an illusory feeling. I didn't expect the impact to be so great. Just withstanding it with my mind is almost unbearable. He let out a long breath, and a faint smile appeared on his face. This feeling of his body transforming into the primordial world was not without reason. It was because he had incorporated the Yellow Springs network into his mind. When the Yellow Springs network became complete, the mind would naturally flow, and it would guide his mind, making him feel like he had transformed into the Yellow Springs network. The Yellow Springs network was similar to the veins of the primordial world. There was not much difference between transforming into the Yellow Springs network and turning into the primordial world. That was why he felt like he had transformed into the primordial world. The feeling of withstanding the impact of the stars was not just a feeling, but a real reality. After he reformed the Yellow Springs network, the Yellow Springs network could no longer break itself to reduce the impact of the stars. Naturally, it could only rely on Luo Fan's mind to reform the Yellow Springs network. Thus, this feeling of impact was real. It was caused by the stars crashing into Luo Fan's mind. After sighing, Luo Fan did not waste any more time. With a thought, the Yellow Springs network shook slightly. With a turn, countless tributaries suddenly spread out from it. These tributaries all flowed downwards, swimming in the earth at an unimaginable speed. They drilled into the endless depths of the earth at an unimaginable speed. The Yellow Springs network itself was formed from the extremely turbid Yin energy. It did not face any resistance in the earth, and it could even be said that it was supported by the origin energy of the earth. Its speed was many times faster than when it was swimming in the void above. As a result, it didn't take long for the tributaries of the Yellow Springs to charge through the boundless sea of blood 45,000 kilometers below and enter deep into the 18 levels of hell. The flow of time in the 18 levels of hell was completely different from the flow of time in the untainted land. Therefore, the 18 levels of hell could also be regarded as another space-time. To break through the barrier between the 18 levels of hell and the boundless sea of blood, unless one had fallen into it or had comprehended space-time and had the ability to move time, even a primordial unity cultivator would not be able to do it. However, the Yellow Springs network possessed unimaginable power, and its nature was similar to the 18 layers of hell. They were all Yin, heavy, and turbid. As a result, it easily broke through the space-time barrier and charged into the 18 layers of hell. The 18 levels of hell were 100,000 miles below the untainted land, corresponding to the endless starry sky above the untainted land. According to the relatively balanced nature of the world, the power in the 18 levels of hell, even if it was not as powerful as the infinite stars in the endless starry sky, was definitely not far from it. The Yellow Springs network was originally located 4,900 miles below the ground. It originally covered the entire untainted land and had already consumed an endless amount of extremely turbid Yin energy. At this moment, there were hundreds of millions of Yellow Springs tributaries extending out. The extremely turbid Yin energy contained in them had long been weakened to an indescribable level. It could be said that at this moment, the Yellow Springs tributaries had already become extremely thin and fragile. They urgently needed the extremely turbid Yin energy to replenish them. Hashtag Chapter 686. Energy had a characteristic similar to water, which was that it would flow from where it was dense to where it was thin. Text first. The energy in the 18 hells was so dense that it could distort time and space, forming the wonderful space-time characteristic of the 18 hells. It was easy to imagine how dense the energy was. In this case, the thin tributary of the Yellow Springs was the downstream of the energy pouring out of the 18 hells. In an instant, endless energy surged into the tributary of the Yellow Springs from the 18 hells, filling it at an unimaginable speed. The boundless spring water formed from the energy in the 18 hells was even purer than the spring water in the original Yellow Springs, and it contained even more extreme een and turbid chi. The spring water flowed into the entire Yellow Springs network at an unimaginable speed. In almost the span of a breath, it had completely made up for the loss of spring water caused by the forced extraction of countless tributaries, allowing the Yellow Springs network to return to its previous state. However, at this moment, the endless energy surging out of the 18 hells was still pouring into the Yellow Springs network. It was still madly transforming into Yellow Springs spring water, continuously merging into the Yellow Springs. The speed at which it was merging was earth-shattering. In almost the span of a few breaths, it had exceeded the limit of the Yellow Springs network. It directly opened up every Yellow Springs in the network and exploded. Through some mysterious transformation, it madly merged into the surrounding earth. When the world was created, there were clear and turbid chi. The light one rose to form the sky, while the turbid one sank to form the earth. Therefore, the extreme een and turbid chi could be said to be the source of the earth. At this moment, the extreme een and turbid chi that had broken through the limits of the Yellow Springs network and merged into the surrounding earth through some mysterious transformation actually recreated the process when the primordial world was created. It actually transformed into endless land once again. The extreme een and turbid chi that surged out of the 18 hells was unimaginably dense, and the amount was indescribable. With so much extreme een and turbid chi turning into land and merging into the surrounding earth, the result was obvious. The earth of the primordial world thickened at an unimaginable speed. Compared to the earth that had existed in the primordial world for more than 100 yuan hui and constantly withstood the pressure of the world, its density and firmness were naturally far inferior. If there were no other changes, it would take at least another 1,000 yuan hui for the newly formed land to completely merge with the earth without any separation. However, the situation at this moment was completely different. At this moment, there were stars descending from the endless starry sky, bombarding the ground and the Yellow Springs network at every moment. This bombardment not only destroyed the stars and turned them into endless star essence, it also created an unimaginable pressure on the earth. Even the Yellow Springs network could only break itself to neutralize the pressure. For the newly formed land, the pressure was naturally even more unbearable. It could only become denser and more stable until it reached its peak and completely fused with the surrounding land. Only then would it no longer be affected. During this process, it was as if countless gigantic stars that contained boundless power had turned into hammers that were constantly hammering the earth, causing the earth to continuously condense. As the new land continued to form, the thickness of the primordial world continued to increase, and its vastness also continued to expand. Although the entire process was not too fast, it was definitely not slow either. It was not a problem for the impact of a star to increase the thickness of the Earth by dozens of kilometers and expand it by hundreds of kilometers. The primordial world did not just refer to the pieces of land that had been smashed into pieces, but the entire lower layer of the primordial world, including the land and the boundless ocean. In this way, the entire Earth continued to expand, but it could not expel the pressure. It could only use all the pressure in the space-time of the entire primordial world. With the appearance of this pressure, the space-time of the entire primordial world began to tremble slightly. As soon as this tremble appeared, it caused an earth-shattering reaction. The huge amount of primordial chi that had become countless times denser due to the explosion of the endless stars also began to act on the space-time of the primordial world along with the tremble. It was like a dam of a reservoir. If it was complete and without any damage, it would naturally be able to survive for a long time. As long as the water in the reservoir did not exceed the limit of the dam, it would not collapse. However, as long as a tiny hole appeared in the reservoir, the stability of the reservoir would be instantly disrupted. The water in the reservoir would constantly impact the tiny hole, and in the end, the tiny hole would expand into a hole that could not be repaired. In the end, the entire dam would be destroyed in a single day. At this moment, the trembling of the space-time of the primordial world was like this small hole. Originally, the entire primordial world was already under some kind of astonishing pressure. Even the sky kept rising under this pressure. At this moment, when such a small hole suddenly appeared, almost all the pressure was transferred to this area. Therefore, in just an instant, the entire world, whether it was the endless stars that fell from the endless starry sky above, or the endless power that surged out from the 18 levels of hell below, all of them were exerting an extremely huge pressure on the space-time of the primordial world. The combination of this pressure finally broke through the shackles of the space-time of the primordial world, causing the space-time of the entire primordial world to change slightly. And this change was almost all concentrated in the aspect of space, but the change in the aspect of time was negligible. After all, the stability of time in the primordial world was so high that Luo-Fan could even interrupt it in front of the primordial unity gold element. However, space only needed the cultivation of the golden immortal realm to easily distort and tear it apart. From this point, it could be seen that the stability of time in the primordial world was many times stronger than the stability of space. Therefore, the effect of the pressure of changing space-time was more targeted at space. And this targeting caused the space of the primordial world to continuously expand at a speed visible to the naked eye. Compared to the entire primordial world, this speed of expansion could only be considered relatively slow. However, in terms of absolute speed, the speed of expansion was quite astonishing. Almost in an instant, millions of miles of space appeared out of thin air in the primordial world. These spatial areas were not just piled up at the edge of the primordial world. The changes to space-time were not the same as the changes to space. If it was purely a change to space, it would naturally be to continuously open up new spaces at the edge of the primordial world. These new spaces would naturally appear at the edge. The changes to space-time covered the entire primordial world. All the areas that changed were almost evenly distributed to every inch of the void of the primordial world. It was precisely because of this that the spatial areas that the primordial world increased in an instant were also scattered to every inch of the void of the entire primordial world. It looked like the entire primordial world was expanding at a speed of millions of miles per second according to its original scale. When such a change appeared, the aura that filled the entire primordial world, which could overturn the world, suddenly retracted. Although it still existed, there was already an indescribable vitality in it. Although this vitality was weak, it was unimaginably tenacious. As it spread out, it seemed to cause an indescribable change to the entire world. It had originally been moving towards destruction, but it had turned into a kind of labor pain before childbirth. It had turned into an incomparably bright and beautiful future. This change was so mysterious that it was enough to allow any living being who cultivated the Tao of life and death to feel the extremely subtle and profound truth of life and death. If they could comprehend it clearly, they might even be able to directly sweep away all the obstacles before they reached the primordial unity realm. They only needed to accumulate enough power over time to easily reach the primordial unity realm. At this moment, Hong Jun was working hard to release his Dharma power in a certain location in the primordial world. This location was above the void, hidden in the original layer of astral wind, lightning, and fire. In this location, in a faintly discernible location, there was a strange existence. There was an extremely subtle distortion of space-time. That was the entrance to a grotto heaven world. The endless Dharma power released by Hong Jun was constantly pouring into this entrance, according to some indescribable law. Clearly, he was using the method taught by Luo-Fan to work hard to refine the grotto heaven world. At this moment, the entire world suddenly underwent a subtle change. The aura that spread between heaven and earth, which made every living being feel that the entire world was heading towards doomsday, death, and collapse, suddenly changed. Although Hong Jun was not a cultivator who cultivated the Tao of life and death, his keen senses and profound cultivation realm were enough for him to comprehend some of the mysteries. When he comprehended these mysteries, Hong Jun suddenly felt as if there was an incomparably wonderful rag gently wiping the world in his eyes. The entire world seemed to have become much clearer than before. Many mysteries that he could not see clearly and did not understand before became extremely clear in his eyes. In an instant, he felt that his cultivation realm had taken another step forward. The primordial barrier also seemed to have weakened a little. However, after all, he cultivated the Tao of fruit, not the Tao of life and death. Therefore, although his cultivation realm had improved, it was not enough for him to directly attain the primordial Tao fruit. Even after his cultivation realm was improved, his cultivation realm was still at the level of half-step primordial Tao. What a pity, I'm just one step away. When he felt this change, even though Hong Jun's Tao heart was perfect, he could not help but feel slightly regretful. However, this regret only appeared for a moment. After that, he fell into an inexplicable state of admiration. Master is really omnipotent. The world was about to be overturned, but with just a gentle push, he completely reversed this overturning fate, turning annihilation into vitality, and turning annihilation into new life. Such thoughts flashed rapidly in Hong Jun's mind. This thought flashed in his mind for a while. Then he composed himself and once again immersed himself in the process of refining the Grotto Heaven world. It was almost impossible for Hong Jun to collect nearly 30 Grotto Heaven worlds in a day. How could he have the time to continue sighing? If he did not seize all the time to familiarize himself with the method his master had taught him, how could he accomplish the goal his master had given him? It was naturally impossible to use brute force to refine a Grotto Heaven world. If he used brute force, even with Luo Fan's cultivation realm at the peak of the grand Luo disbanded Tao, it would probably take him tens of thousands of years to completely refine a Grotto Heaven world. It was even more impossible for Hong Jun, a half-step primordial Tao expert, to do so. Therefore, the method Luo Fan taught Hong Jun was to use all kinds of incredible means to directly send magic power into the place where the rules of the Grotto Heaven world interweaved. With the flow of the rules of the Grotto Heaven world itself, he would eventually refine the entire Grotto Heaven world. Then, with the condensation of all kinds of rules and laws, he would directly shrink and condense the complete space and time of the Grotto Heaven, turning it into something solid and storing it away. This process sounded simple, but it was naturally very difficult to do. Just finding the place where the rules of the Grotto Heaven world interweaved required a very deep understanding and comprehension of the Grotto Heaven world. To use the flow of the rules to send magic power to the key points of the Grotto Heaven world and refine the entire Grotto Heaven world, the amount of magic power needed was beyond imagination. With Hong Jun's current cultivation realm of a half-step primordial Tao expert, he could only barely do it with all his might. As for using the condensation of all kinds of rules and laws to shrink and condense the Grotto Heaven world into something solid, this was also the most difficult part of the whole process. The difficulty was not the amount of magic power needed for this process. In fact, this process did not require the use of any magic power. It only required the flow of his mind and will to control the Grotto Heaven world to produce such changes. In fact, the most difficult part of this last point was the grasp of timing. It was like shooting a flying saucer. If the timing was not grasped, whether it was too slow or too fast, it would only hit empty air. Using the condensation of the rules and laws to shrink the Grotto Heaven and turn it into something solid was hundreds of millions of times more complicated than shooting a flying saucer. Naturally, the requirement for the grasp of timing was hundreds of millions of times higher. Under such circumstances, the last step, which consumed the least energy, was the longest in the process of Hong Jun collecting the entire Grotto Heaven world. In the previous year, he had collected more than 100 Grotto Heaven worlds, and he could compress the first few steps into 4 to 6 hours. The rest of the time was wasted on grasping the timing of the last step. In other words, in the process of collecting more than 100 Grotto Heaven worlds, Hongjun spent at most a month on the first few steps. However, the time spent on the last step added up to 11 months. This time, it was not much different from the previous times. Hongjun was very fast. In less than 2 hours, he had already completed the first few steps. It could be said that he had completely refined the entire Grotto Heaven. Then, he began to enter the last step. He worked hard to find the most suitable time to cut into his will in the endless flowing rules and laws. He wanted to condense the rules and laws, shrink the Grotto Heaven world, and turn it into something solid. Although he had already done it more than 100 times, this step was already extremely difficult for him. Once, twice, thrice. After spending several days and experimenting more than 300,000 times, Hongjun finally seized an opportunity that was less than a millionth of a second to cut his will into the Grotto Heaven world, causing the entire Grotto Heaven world to tremble. All the rules and laws suddenly stopped. Then, space and time trembled. The entire Grotto Heaven world's resistance towards the Great Desolation world instantly disappeared. Under the pressure of the extremely stable space and time in the Great Desolation world, it began to rapidly shrink. Soon, it had shrunk into a strange pearl that was only the size of a thumb. It had turned into a solid existence and appeared in front of Hongjun. The bead was only the size of a thumb and seemed to be solid, but there seemed to be a small world inside it. This small world was extremely mysterious and detailed. If it was magnified hundreds of millions of times, one could even see the complete veins of a blade of grass within it. The small world seemed to be enveloped by a layer of strange fog. It stopped at the center of the bead, and an indescribably powerful aura faintly seeped out from within. It was as if a complete world had fallen into a deep slumber. This was the Grotto Heaven World Pearl. It was formed after refining and collecting the Grotto Heaven world using the method passed down by Luo Fan. Although this item was specially created for Hongjun by Luo Fan in order to collect the Grotto Heaven world, in reality, this Grotto Heaven World Pearl could also be seen as an extremely powerful magic tool. Moreover, it was a Grotto Heaven magic tool. It contained the power of a Grotto Heaven world. If a cultivator refined this Grotto Heaven World Pearl, they would naturally be able to possess the terrifying power of the Grotto Heaven world. If this power was used to fight against an enemy, it would be enough to crush all golden immortals. If it was used to prove one's Tao with strength, all the bottlenecks before reaching grand unity would no longer be an obstacle to one's cultivation. The mysteriousness of the Grotto Heaven World Pearl could be seen from this. Although the Grotto Heaven World Pearl was so magical, Hongjun's expression did not change at all when he saw it. He raised his hand and casually grabbed the pearl in his hand. With another gentle push, he sent the Grotto Heaven World Pearl into the strange void behind his head that he had specially opened a year ago to store these Grotto Heaven World Pearls. At this moment, there were already more than 100 Grotto Heaven World Pearls of different colors floating in the strange void. Hashtag Chapter 687. Each of these Grotto Heaven World Pearls was the condensation of a Grotto Heaven world. Each of them was an indescribably mysterious and magical artifact with unimaginable uses. Text first, just one of these artifacts was enough for an ordinary cultivator to break through all the barriers to becoming a primordial immortal. But now, these hundreds of artifacts hovered in the void like ordinary beads, slowly swirling around each other according to some rather mysterious law. Hongjun had inserted a Grotto Heaven World Pearl, and it was like throwing a drop of water into boiling oil. In an instant, there was an incomparably intense change. The entire strange entity formed by the hundreds of beads began to move frantically. Each bead was constantly flying through the entire void, making contact with every other bead in an effort to re-establish a new balance and create a new system. After a long time, the vibrations finally calmed down. All the beads once again formed a mysterious entity, slowly circulating in the void that Hongjun had opened up. Only then did Hongjun completely relax. He hid the void again and took a step forward. Borrowing the power of the purple cloud palace, he crossed the void and arrived at another grotto heaven world hidden in the center of a vortex of baleful aura in the void. Every time a grotto heaven world pearl was thrown into the void, the power and aura that these grotto heaven world pearls emitted would naturally interact with each other and interact with each other. In the process of interaction, the system formed by the many grotto heaven world pearls would naturally be broken. Then, the new grotto heaven world pearls would be added into the system to re-establish the balance. The various changes that occurred in the entire process were mysterious and complicated. Even Hong Jun found it hard to understand at this moment. This was only secondary. The most important thing was that during this process, the power of every single heavenly abode world pearl would continuously combine together, naturally producing an indescribable impact force. This impact would naturally have a huge impact on the void that contained the grotto heaven world pearl. Therefore, it could be said that every time a grotto heaven world pearl was thrown in, it was a huge test for the void that Hong Jun had opened up. As long as something went wrong, the void would directly collapse and turn into nothingness. It was precisely because of this that Hong Jun would be so nervous and concerned every time he placed the grotto heaven world pearl into the void. Fortunately, when the grotto heaven world pearls were circulating stably, they would naturally give off all sorts of mysterious auras, constantly refining and strengthening the void, gradually increasing the endurance of the void. Moreover, every time the void collapsed and reformed, it would also greatly temper the void, greatly increasing its endurance. It was precisely because of this that this space was able to withstand over 100 paradise world pearls collapsing and reforming within it. If it was the void that had just been opened a year ago, perhaps a single impact would have been enough to cause the entire void to collapse. Hong Jun spent less than 4 hours to refine this grotto heaven world. But the third step also required him to experiment more than 200,000 times before he seized the opportunity to complete the entire process of refining and collecting. Although it still consumed a lot of energy, it was at least a little better than before. This was also the only reason why Hong Jun could maintain his confidence and complete his master's orders. Otherwise, it would simply be an impossible task to collect one. 296 billion square meters of grotto heaven world in a yuan Wei, given that every single grotto heaven world would take such a long time to collect. Sending the grotto heaven world pearls into the void naturally caused another round of chaos. But in the end, he still managed to re-establish a complete system, and all the grotto heaven world pearls finally recovered their stability. At the same time, he also felt that the stability of the entire void seemed to have increased slightly. If it's able to withstand 296 billion grotto heaven world beads in the end, to what extent will the stability of this space increase? Sensing this increase, Hong Jun could not help but have an inexplicable fantasy. With this in mind, his ability to collect space became even stronger. He didn't waste any more time, and he didn't even pay too much attention to the changes that would occur when the grotto heaven world pearls enter the void. As long as he collected the grotto heaven world pearls, he would directly send them into the void, and he wouldn't care about any changes that would occur in the void. Instead, he would directly move the void to the next location, allowing the void to undergo the test and refinement. After so many previous experiences, he already understood that every refinement of the void would lay the foundation for the next test. Generally speaking, every test wouldn't have any destructive effects on the void. Taking 10,000 steps back, even if the void couldn't withstand this test, and it could directly shatter the void, he couldn't do anything even if he just stood there and watched. He could only watch the void shatter. In the future, he could only collect the grotto heaven world pearls and think of a way to preserve them. From the looks of it, it wouldn't be of any use if he didn't pay attention to the grotto heaven world pearls re-establishing the balance in the void. After thinking it through, Hong Jun naturally made a rational decision to not care about it anymore. Next, Hong Jun's speed of collecting the grotto heaven world pearls became tighter and faster. With the accumulation of experience, he had a better understanding of the method of collecting the Grotto Heaven world that Luo Fan had taught him. His understanding of the profoundness of it also deepened. After 100 years, after collecting the 1,000 Grotto Heaven world pearls, Hong Jun's understanding of the method finally broke through a certain limit. The entire process of refining and collecting the Grotto Heaven world was compressed to within 2 hours. Although this breakthrough was great, it wasn't all. In fact, although it was a great improvement to compress the speed to within 2 hours, he could only collect 12 Grotto Heaven worlds in a day. It was still far from the speed that Luo Fan had requested, not to mention making up for the 100 years that he had lagged behind. The reason why there was a need to mention this breakthrough was because this breakthrough had directly broken Hong Jun's greatest shackle of not being able to increase his speed. He had found a pattern in the last step of using the laws to shrink the Grotto Heaven and turn it into a Grotto Heaven world pearl. In other words, he no longer needed to experiment again and again to find the right timing like before. Instead, he could use various mysterious methods to deduce and calculate the location of the right timing. Thus, the number of attempts was reduced by 1,000 times. At that time, he only needed to try dozens of times to grasp the timing and complete the last step of collecting the Grotto Heaven world pearl. After this breakthrough, Hong Jun's speed of collecting the Grotto Heaven world pearl had increased by many times. Moreover, as he broke through the shackles, his progress was no longer stagnant. Although it did not directly increase by leaps and bounds, every time he used the method that Luo Fan passed on to him, he would be able to comprehend some new things, allowing him to have a deeper understanding of the method, and thus slightly speed up the time it would take him to collect the heavenly abode next time. During this process, another 1,000 years passed. Hong Jun's speed of collecting the Grotto Heaven world pearl had finally reached Luo Fan's requirement, reaching the level of collecting nearly 30 Grotto Heaven worlds in a day. This was the first time Hong Jun saw the hope of completing Luo Fan's request. After that, he seemed to have fallen into a bottleneck. This speed had been maintained for a full 10,000 years. Only in the process of collecting a Grotto Heaven world did he make a breakthrough, allowing him to completely familiarize himself with the laws of the Grotto Heaven world. He no longer needed to spend any time to comprehend it. As long as he felt the aura of the Grotto Heaven world, he would instantly know where the laws of the Grotto Heaven world were intertwined. This change allowed his speed of collecting Grotto Heaven worlds to increase once again. Finally, he broke through the original limit and reached the level of collecting 36 Grotto Heaven worlds in a day. This basically meant that the task that Luo Fan had instructed Hong Jun to collect 296 billion Grotto Heaven worlds in a Yuan Hui was no longer difficult. The progress that he had lagged behind in the first 1,000 years could be easily made up for in the next 110,000 years. He might even have a lot of free time in the end. When this happened, Hong Jun's mood finally relaxed completely. His mentality of collecting Grotto Heaven worlds had finally changed completely. He was no longer in a hurry to complete the task as before. Instead, he had time to comprehend the mysteries of each Grotto Heaven world that were different from the other Grotto Heaven worlds. He also had time to comprehend the mysteries behind all the changes that occurred in the process of collecting Grotto Heaven worlds using the method that Luo Fan had imparted to him. He even had the mood to comprehend the various subtle and mysterious principles that were displayed in the various changes caused by the Grotto Heaven world pearl entering the void that he had opened up. This change in mood finally made him realize what he had missed in the past 10,000 years. For a moment, his mood could not help but fluctuate. He felt both regretful and fortunate. He also felt an indescribable reverence for Luo Fan and his master. The 296 billion square Grotto Heaven worlds of the untainted world were evolved from the supreme Great Tao after the untainted world completely absorbed all the foreign worlds after the last great tribulation of heaven and earth. Each of these Grotto Heaven worlds contains some of the most profound mysteries that the supreme Great Tao of the untainted world had added after the great tribulation of heaven and earth. If a cultivator could directly comprehend the supreme Great Tao, he would naturally have a chance to completely comprehend these mysteries. However, The difficulty was like fishing a small steel needle in the boundless sea. One could imagine how difficult it was. These grotto heaven worlds were equivalent to fishing the steel needle out of the boundless sea and placing it directly in front of him. Although it was still difficult to comprehend the mysteries, it was hundreds of millions of times less difficult than directly comprehending the mysteries from the supreme great Tao. In particular, Hong Jun could directly grasp the rules and laws of the grotto heaven world with the method that Luo Fan imparted to him. If he wanted to understand the mysteries contained in the grotto heaven world, it was many times less difficult than ordinary creatures. How great was this opportunity? How rare was this opportunity? However, such a great opportunity, such a rare opportunity, had been wasted by Hong Jun for 10,000 years. How could he not feel regret? At the same time, although he had wasted 10,000 years, he had, after all, realized how precious it was. Moreover, he still had nearly 110,000 years to make up for it. This naturally made him feel quite lucky. As for his reverence for his master, it was needless to say. Not to mention that the method that his master imparted to him was so mysterious that it could actually allow him to directly comprehend the essence and mysteries of each grotto heaven world. Just the fact that his master had given him such a good job was enough to make him admire his master very much. Hong Jun naturally knew what it meant to mend the pen after the sheep had been lost. After realizing what he had missed before, he went all out in each grotto heaven world, comprehending what he could comprehend in it. He paid attention to the mysteries behind even the slightest change in the method that Luo Fan imparted to him. He paid attention to every detail of the drastic changes that were caused after the grotto heaven world pearl was thrown into the void. Under such actions, the speed at which Hong Jun collected the grotto heaven world was naturally affected. This impact caused the speed at which he collected the grotto heaven world to be reduced to the speed of 10,000 years ago. It was still maintained at the same speed as the speed that Luo Fan requested. However, this kind of slow speed was completely different from the previous kind of slow speed. In this kind of slow speed, there was some kind of inexplicable rhythm. It was as if he was making some kind of progress at every moment, and his cultivation realm was receiving some kind of impact. However, it was not like he was in a hurry like he wished he could have a few more bodies. Time passed by quickly. In the blink of an eye, nearly 110,000 years had passed. In the past 110,000 years, the speed at which Hong Jun collected the grotto heaven world became faster and faster because he had a deeper understanding of the method that Luo Fan imparted to him, and he became more and more familiar with the grotto heaven world. This kind of speed was the speed of steady improvement. It was the speed that Hong Jun obtained after he had a deep understanding of the mysteries contained in the grotto heaven world. In reality, after Hong Jun obtained this kind of speed no longer had any meaning to him. Because 110,000 years ago, when he was able to increase the speed at which he collected the grotto heaven world to 36 square meters a day, completing Luo Fan's instructions was no longer a problem for him. In other words, he could increase his speed at any time and collect more grotto heaven worlds at any time. Naturally, speed no longer had any meaning to him. It was because of this that Hong Jun could easily adjust his speed, and only after 110,000 years, when it was close to the time that Luo Fan had set, did he completely collect the last grotto heaven world. In the instant that he sent the grotto heaven world pearl that came from the last grotto heaven world into the space that he had opened, an indescribable tremor came from that space. After 120,000 years of refinement, the space that Hong Jun had opened to store the grotto heaven world pearl had undergone an earth-shattering change compared to before. First of all, this space was more than 10,000 times larger than before. Right now, there were 296 million grotto heaven world pearls that flickered with all sorts of different colors in this space. These lights were not dazzling, but they were subtle and profound. They were displayed from the front to the boundless horizon. Secondly, the strength of this space was at least 10,000 times more stable than before. Back then, the impact from the transformation and reorganization of several grotto heaven world pearls was enough to make this grotto heaven tremble and almost collapse. But at this moment, after being refined by the one. 296 million Grotto Heaven World Pearls. The pressure from the transformation and reorganization of the one. 295,999,999 Grotto Heaven World Pearls could not cause any damage to it all. Thus, the stability of the Grotto Heaven World Pearls had increased by quite a bit. Thirdly, it was also the most obvious change. That was above this space, in the endless distance, the auras of the one. 295,999,999 Grotto Heaven World Pearls intertwined, forming a strange light shadow. This light shadow contained an endless number of worlds, and it faintly corresponded with the Grotto Heaven World Pearls. The mysteries of light and shadow contained in it were mysterious and indescribable. And when the last Grotto Heaven World Pearl entered the space that had undergone a tremendous change, a change that surpassed the one. 295,999,999 Grotto Heaven World Pearls in the past appeared. In an instant, the entire space was twisted into a chaotic mess. Whether it was the light-shadow world formed by the aura of the Grotto Heaven World Pearls, the various powers that originally existed in the space, or even the various mysterious laws of the space, they were all instantly crushed, mixed, and turned into a gray, chaotic state. During this process, the space suddenly shook violently. An aura that was about to collapse came from it. This aura was extremely strong, and Hong Jun did not know what this aura meant at all. He knew that if he did not do anything, this space would definitely collapse in the next instant. And this time, if this space completely collapsed, it would not be like in the past, where he only needed to find a carrier to carry these Grotto Heaven World Pearls. It should be known that at this moment, there were 296 billion Grotto Heaven World Pearls in the space. The Grotto Heaven World, contained in each Grotto Heaven World Pearl, was a carrier that had been added to the supreme Great Tao after the last heavenly tribulation. Therefore, when they were combined, they were equivalent to the supreme Great Tao, equivalent to all the gains of the entire untainted world during the last Great Tao of heaven and earth. If these Grotto Heaven World Pearls appeared in the outside world at the same time, the process of them combining and complementing each other would be a process of restructuring the supreme Great Tao. The pressure that it emitted might not be able to destroy the untainted world, but it was definitely not a problem to turn a radius of tens of thousands of miles into nothingness. And this radius of tens of thousands of miles clearly enveloped Hong Jun. Chapter 688. Therefore, it could be said that as long as these Dong Tian World Pearls appeared in the untainted universe, they would destroy Hong Jun along with the void within a radius of tens of thousands of miles in an instant before he could escape. Hong Jun was naturally very clear about this. His mind was raised to its peak state in an instant, and all of his thoughts moved at an unimaginable speed toward the void behind his head, which was specially created to contain the Dong Tian World Pearls. He was the one who had created this space. Text first. Every minute change, all the rules, laws, and even more power within it were completely under his control. Under such circumstances, he poured all of his will into this part of the void, and his control over this part of the void skyrocketed by who knows how many times. In the blink of an eye, everything in this void was completely under his control, as if it was a part of his body. With this control, the supreme pressure produced by the void that was about to collapse directly acted on his body, making him feel that his entire body, from the deepest part of his sea of consciousness to the surface of his skin, was bearing an indescribable pressure. This pressure was very strange, although it made Hong Jun feel extremely uncomfortable, as if his entire body and spirit could collapse at any time. Because of this pressure, he vaguely knew that this was just an illusion. To him, this pressure was just an illusory feeling. For Hong Jun, who had seen many things and cultivated the ability of a half-step primordial unity with his own strength, such a strange pressure did not have any hesitation at all. He instantly understood what was going on. He knew that this was clearly the pressure of the void acting on his thoughts, causing his thoughts to transmit the pressure to his body and spirit, which caused this strange feeling at this moment. However, it was not entirely true to say that this feeling was completely illusory. After all, this pressure was acting on his thoughts. If his mind was damaged and collapsed or destroyed, then what awaited Hong Jun would definitely not be a small matter. Even if he wouldn't die and his soul would scatter, he would suffer great damage and his cultivation realm would be greatly damaged. That was unavoidable. At this moment, when such a shocking change occurred in the primordial world, his cultivation realm was greatly damaged. To him, there was not much difference between him dying and his soul dispersing. Therefore, under such circumstances, after Hong Jun felt this inexplicable pressure, he instantly focused all his attention. He no longer had the slightest bit of carelessness. In that instant, the feeling he had towards his own body had been reduced to the extreme. At this moment, that part of the void seemed to be his real body. At that moment, Hong Jun's expression became extremely wooden as he stood there. His entire body seemed to have turned into a dead statue, and there was no trace of life coming from him. Although, at this moment, there was still endless magic power flowing endlessly in his body, and he could even faintly feel the earthly immortal's Tao fruit gathering and dispersing in his dantian. However, all of these only made it seem like he had added mana and a vessel for the Tao fruit on the foundation of this dead object sculpture. Every single one of the 1,296 million heavenly world pearls was an extremely shocking treasure that was sufficient to allow ordinary cultivators to attain the peak of the golden immortal realm with their strength alone. The power of so many magic items could even be compared to the 296 million peak of the golden immortal realm. Compared to the current Hong Jun, he was just a little weaker. Hong Jun's cultivation realm was a half-step primordial unity, which was stronger than the peak of the golden immortal realm. Although, when a cultivator cultivated to his level, every difference in cultivation realm was enough to bring about a difference of thousands of times in strength. However, even using the most exaggerated calculation method, Hong Jun was only equivalent to tens of thousands of peak of the golden immortal realm. At this moment, there were 296 million of such existences. This was enough to crush Hong Jun like a giant crushing an ant. In particular, at this moment, in this void, the power of the 296 million Dong Tian world pearls was flowing and communicating with each other, and the mysterious aura contained in each pearl complemented each other, forming an extremely complete, mysterious, and incredible aura. These various changes caused the 296 million Dong Tian world pearls to not be in a state of disunity. Instead, they formed a huge whole, and all the power was unified in one place. Every time the pearl moved, the power of the 296 million Dong Tian world pearls was flowing, changing, and recombining. Under such circumstances, even though Hong Jun was a half-step primordial unity, in terms of power alone, he was still an insignificant existence in this void. However, it was obvious that Hong Jun's consciousness could not only exert power here. The greatest effect of Hong Jun's consciousness entering this void was nothing else but to bring a dominant will to this mysterious void. It allowed the power of this void to be fully exerted under the integration of this will. After all, the void was still a void. Its capacity was many times stronger than that of living creatures and cultivators. At this moment, this void had been refined for 295,999,999 times, causing its stability, capacity, and endurance to be improved beyond imagination. It could even withstand the recombination of the power of the 295,999,999 Dong Tian world pearls without collapsing. Although the addition of the last Dong Tian world pearl had increased the power of the recombination process by several times, it was still at the same level as before. Since it was at the same level, it meant that the two forces could be locked in a stalemate through some ingenious and mysterious means. In other words, the void that could withstand the power of the recombination process of the 295,999,999 999 Dong Tian Whirl Pearls could withstand the pressure caused by the recombination of the last Dong Tian Whirl Pearl through some ingenious and mysterious means. Because Hong Jun had a clear understanding of this, he did not immediately seek help from his master. Instead, he tried his best to find a way to solve this problem by himself. When this void turned into his body, Hong Jun suddenly had all kinds of inexplicable insights. In an instant, he felt that endless information was generated in his body out of thin air, and he instantly understood it all. In a trance, he seemed to understand a lot of principles that he had been vague about before. With a single thought, the space in that area trembled slightly. One of the strange laws within it trembled slightly, and a subtle yet indescribable change occurred. The appearance of this change caused the collapsing aura produced by this part of the void to weaken slightly. Following that, he did not stop at all. He continuously fine-tuned the various laws in this space, causing the space to undergo all sorts of indescribable changes. As he adjusted, the aura that was produced from the void, which was on the verge of collapse, continued to weaken and weaken. Unknowingly, it had already weakened to the point where, although it still existed, it had already reached an acceptable level. It meant that even if the situation was the worst, Hong Jun could no longer really hurt his life, and it could not even hurt his cultivation foundation. Compared to when the aura of collapse first appeared, there was already an earth-shattering change. It could be said that it had completely reversed the situation. It was obviously not a simple thing to obtain such a huge achievement. At this moment, Hong Jun, who was floating in the void of the untainted world, kept trembling. Countless beads of sweat gushed out of his body like water gushing out a faucet, then seeped out of his body and fell. Countless beads of sweat kept dripping from his body. The speed and quantity of the beads were quite shocking. It made it seem as if it was raining cats and dogs under Hong Jun's body. The degree of sweating was already extremely exaggerated. If Hong Jun had not been a half-step primordial immortal, and his body's vitality was almost endless, perhaps even sweating would have been enough to kill him. For Hong Jun, who had almost never sweated, it was enough to show how great the pressure he was under and how hard he had worked. Since his body was already displaying such performance, it was naturally impossible for his mind and will to remain calm and at ease. At this moment, Hong Jun's mind and will were filled with endless information at every moment, which was enough to drown his mind and make him unable to think. The information was extremely complicated and boring, but it hid some mysterious and indescribable great Tao truth, the truth of the universe, and the secrets of heaven and earth. All of his will and mind were working at full speed. There were hundreds of millions of decisions that he had to make at every moment, millions of changes that he had to adjust, and endless rules that he had to balance at every moment. All of this made him almost forget the passage of time and his own existence. The results of his hard work were quite remarkable. Under his hard work, the tremendous pressure produced by the collapse and reorganization of the 296 billion heavenly pearls kept colliding in the void, causing it to tremble as if it would collapse at any time. But that was all. The void remained intact after a few days, and it was still not broken by the terrifying force. The 296 billion heavenly pearls had gradually stabilized, and a brand new, extremely mysterious, exquisite, and stable system was about to take shape. This was also the most dangerous moment of the entire reorganization process. The moment the entire system was completely formed, it would erupt with power that was 10 times stronger than before. This was obviously the greatest challenge for Hong Jun, who was already giving his all at this moment. At this moment, Hong Jun was already extremely tired, and he even wanted to lie down and never wake up again. Although only a few days had passed, these few days were longer than hundreds of millions of years in Hong Jun's eyes. At the very least, the hundreds of millions of years that he had spent in the Purple Cloud Palace did not feel as long as these few days. In order for a void to exist for a long time, it naturally needed countless rules and laws. When these laws and laws were combined together, they determined the stability of this area of the void and determined the ability of this area of the void to withstand power. Under such circumstances, in order to strengthen the stability of the void and prevent it from collapsing under the huge pressure, the rules and laws that Hong Jun needed to change naturally included all the rules and laws that existed in the void. In order to make this change in the direction of increasing the stability of the void and increasing the endurance of the void, the changes to every rule and law must be in line with some profound truth. In other words, to change every rule and law, Hong Jun needed to put in endless effort. Under such circumstances, how could Hong Jun not spend billions of years to change the countless rules and laws in the void? How could he not feel exhausted? However, although he felt that the days were extremely difficult, and although he felt exhausted, Hong Jun's harvest was also unimaginably huge. In these few days, through the adjustment of the countless rules and laws that existed in the void, Hong Jun felt that all the mysteries of 296 billion square heavens that he had seen and comprehended in the past Yuan Wei were gradually being melted into one. Among them, countless mysteries that he had been confused about when he comprehended them before were now truly understood and controlled by him. An incomparably complex and mysterious origin principle gradually took shape in his mind. In a trance, he felt that his understanding of space, the world, and the Dong Tian was gradually moving toward a realm of omniscience and omniscience. It was as if he could open up any perfect and mysterious Dong Tian at will with a single thought. It was as if every movement of his was able to attract origin chi like the Dong Tian world. The way he used to attract power was able to attract endless origin chi and power. A strange feeling of omnipotence arose from his heart. In this feeling, his cultivation realm continued to improve in a slow but determined way. At this moment, a few days later, as if the conditions were right, he broke through a barrier that was originally as strong as the world barrier, but now seemed as fragile as a piece of paper. With this breakthrough, the earthly immortal's Tao fruit in his body collapsed with a bang. Then, in an instant, starting from the tiniest unit of magic power, it reassembled into a mysterious fruit that seemed to contain all the profundities of the universe and seemed to have endless worlds flowing endlessly within it. This fruit was extremely different from the original earthly immortal Tao fruit. Its degree of refinement, profoundness, and even the power it contained were tens of thousands of times different. That was the Tai Tao fruit. It was in that wonderful state that Hong Jun unknowingly broke through the shackles of the earthly immortal Tao fruit, and thus naturally comprehended the mysteries of Tai, and thus obtained the Tai Tao fruit that he had been diligently seeking for hundreds of millions of years. The moment the Tai Tao fruit formed in Hong Jun's dantian, Hong Jun's body was instantly shattered by the aura of the Tai Tao fruit. It turned into countless tiny particles that replaced Hong Jun's original position. Every single one of these specks that were as small as dust was complete and flawless, and there was some kind of mysterious connection between them, allowing them to barely maintain a human form. Although they had already been blasted into pieces, they only looked much more illusory than before, and they did not directly perish. The next moment, the Tai Tao fruit trembled slightly, and it began to beat rapidly like a heartbeat. As it beat, the tiny particles that were produced from the shattering of Hong Jun's body also began to beat rapidly. This kind of pulsation, every time it moved, it would drive an endless amount of power into these particles, causing the intrinsic quality of these particles to improve visibly. Every time it expanded and contracted, the particles would collide with each other, and the connection between each particle and the other particles would be strengthened and deepened. The speed of this beat was extremely fast. Almost every second, there were tens of thousands of beats. After a breath of time, the number of beats had reached an incredible level of billions of times. At this time, every tiny particle was thousands of times stronger than before, and the connection between the particles had also strengthened by countless times. However, this was already close to the limit. At this time, The effect of every contraction and jump on the improvement of those particles and the strengthening of the connection between the particles was already very small. It was almost to the point that Hong Jun could not detect it with his perception ability. At this moment, the Tai Tao fruit suddenly paused, and then it shook violently. The countless particles suddenly condensed and directly condensed into one in the void, forming a complete Hong Jun. Hashtag Chapter 689. The newly condensed Hong Jun's body was many times stronger than before. If the current Hong Jun's body was diamond, then the previous Hong Jun's body could only be seen as tofu. The difference between the two was huge. The reason for this was that in that breath of time, the Tai Dao fruit that Hong Jun had just condensed emitted an incredible and mysterious power, causing Hong Jun's body, which was still at the earthly immortal Dao fruit level, to be refined countless times, allowing this body to rise to the Tai Dao fruit level in an extremely short period of time. And the body of the Tai Dao fruit level was naturally many times stronger than the body of the earthly immortal Dao fruit level. The changes in Hong Jun's body were not all changes after attaining the Tai Dao fruit. After attaining the primordial unity Tao fruit, the power of the Dharma power units inside Hong Jun's body skyrocketed, and the huge three-dimensional talisman that acted as the Dharma power units became much more complicated and abstruse than before. Each of these three-dimensional talisman seemed to be a complete entity composed of 296 billion square Dongtian worlds in a mysterious way. Every unit of magic power was slowly operating. Every individual inside, that was like a grotto heaven world, was constantly exchanging all kinds of mysterious power with other individuals, making the power of each unit countless times stronger than before. At the same time, Hong Jun's Sea of Consciousness also underwent a tremendous change. In an instant, the originally complete Sea of Consciousness trembled and split into 296 billion regions. Each area was extremely small. At most, it was the size of a room. However, each area was gradually becoming complete and growing. When Hong Jun's body was reconstructed and refined, the regions of the Sea of Consciousness had already increased by thousands of times. Moreover, the degree of completeness had also increased beyond imagination, turning into complete, strange worlds. These worlds were extremely mysterious. Every single one of them vaguely corresponded to the 296 billion square grotto heaven worlds that originally existed in the primordial world. In fact, the various profundities, rules, and laws they possessed were extremely similar. Apart from that, the scenes in these small worlds were extremely similar to the 296 billion square grotto heaven worlds. However, compared to the real grotto heaven world, everything in it had shrunk by countless times. In this extremely complete 296 billion square feet small world, in the position that seemed to be above the Sea of Consciousness, Hong Jun's incomparably tall spirit was wearing a long robe and sitting cross-legged. The 296 billion square feet small world was laid under him in an extremely mysterious way, as if it was directly suppressed by his body. At this moment, Hong Jun's soul seemed to have become material, and his body emitted a completely different aura from before. It was as if he was in control of everything. It was as if the entire world had been completely absorbed into his mind and was completely under his control. This sort of aura was completely different from the aura cultivated from the Grand Dao fruit that Luo Fan had taught him all those years ago. Similarly, the form of his magic power units and the form of his Grand Unity Dao fruit were completely different from the form of the Dao fruit that Luo Fan had taught him. With such a change, it meant that Hong Jun had already transcended the shackles of the technique and had truly embarked on his own path. From now on, he already had the qualifications to cultivate independently. In other words, even if he did not have any guidance from Luo Fan in the future, he would still be able to advance step by step on the Dao fruit Dao, and finally reach the peak of the Dao fruit Dao to obtain the primordial chaos Dao fruit. Such progress was already the most essential progress. It meant that Hong Jun had already obtained the most important life sublimation in his life. In a daze, Hong Jun felt that the world in his eyes had suddenly undergone all sorts of unbelievable changes. The intimacy of the entire primordial world towards him had suddenly increased by countless times. It was as if in an instant he had already become one with the entire world. All the mysteries, principles, and secrets of the entire world seemed to be completely open to him. There were no advertisements at all. With a slight thought, he understood countless problems that he had encountered in his past cultivation. He had originally planned to seize all the time to ask his master for guidance after this matter ended. With just a slight breath, an endless amount of origin chi would swarm towards him, directly pouring into his body like a black hole, fusing with his body, fusing with his magic power, and fusing with his sea of consciousness world. With a slight raise of his hand, the world naturally responded. It was as if in an instant he had already moved his mind and spoken a Tao. In a daze, Hong Jun already understood that his position in the entire primordial world was completely different from before. Vaguely, he seemed to have a feeling that he seemed to have replaced the position of a certain existence. Perhaps this is the feeling after obtaining the Tai Dao fruit. At this time, Hong Jun had achieved Tai Tao fruit, and the realm of Tai Loose number was already unbelievably profound, but he still couldn't fully understand why he had such a wonderful feeling. In the end, he could only attribute it to the unparalleled exquisiteness of the Tao fruit and Tao that his master had taught him. The process of Hong Jun obtaining the Tai Dao fruit seemed to be very long, but in fact, only a few breaths had passed since Hong Jun comprehended the Tai Dao fruit and stabilized the Tai Dao fruit. At that time, the power that the entire system would erupt with when it was fully formed, which was 10 times stronger than before, had yet to erupt. It was still brewing, still preparing to completely erupt at any moment. It would completely collapse and shatter the void that carried the one. 296 billion grotto heaven world pearls. This kind of pressure was enough to make Hong Jun despair before. But this moment, Hong Jun was completely different from before. At this moment, Hong Jun's cultivation realm had already improved compared to before, and the power of his magical powers was more than 10,000 times stronger than before. He was already filled with infinite confidence towards this kind of change that was enough to make him despair before. He was confident that no matter how many times the pressure increased, he could protect the void and prevent it from being destroyed under the impact of the pressure. With a slight thought, his will, which was many times stronger than before, frantically surged into the void. Every rule and law in the void, every bit of energy, even space and time, was instantly under his complete control. The terrifying pressure emitted by the huge system formed by the one. 296 billion grotto heaven world pearls was directly transferred to him. This kind of pressure might have been enough to make Hong Jun feel that his body was on the verge of collapse before. But at this moment, after his body had risen to the level of Tai, this kind of pressure was nothing to him. With a slight thought, he could completely distinguish the real and fake pressure. The feeling of pressure on his body completely disappeared in an instant. This did not mean that the pressure had completely disappeared, but rather that the pressure had been completely seen through by his supreme mind. It could no longer be used on his mind to transfer it to his body. It could only be limited to his mind, and could no longer cause any illusions in him. There was no limit to the control of the rules and laws. After all, what determined the level of the world and the stability of the space were the different types of rules and laws that were definitely not much different from each other and were differentiated by different combinations of rules and laws. In other words, as long as the combination of the rules and laws was changed, the stability of the space could be improved almost infinitely. Under such circumstances, Hong Jun's will could naturally continue to greatly improve the tolerance of the void's power through the control of the rules and laws of the void. With a slight thought, all the rules and laws of the entire void were completely scattered by him in an instant, and almost at the same time, they began to reform. In the blink of an eye, they combined into a more complicated, mysterious, and incredible form. This form was almost the product of the combination of all the mysteries of the one. 296 billion square grotto heavens. The appearance of this form caused the strength of the entire void to become more than 100 times stronger than before. In a certain aspect, it was even stronger than the strength of the space in the untainted world. As the strength of the space increased, the one. 296 billion grotto heavens world pearls finally completely stabilized. A vast and infinite power, which was 10 times stronger than the power that existed at all times before, directly erupted from the system and acted on the void. Crackle, crackle, crackle. Strange sounds instantly rang out from every inch of the void. The entire void was trembling under the impact, trembling nonstop. It seemed like it was about to completely collapse under the impact. However, even though it was already trembling, the void still remained intact. After the pressure completely disappeared, it was still hanging behind Hong Jun's head. The one. 296 billion grotto heavens world pearls were hanging high in the void like a sky full of stars. They drew mysterious trajectories and formed an extremely mysterious and strange pattern. It emitted an incredible power that enveloped the entire void. At the bottom of the void, the auras of the countless paradise world pearls were gathered together, forming a strange world. It was as if the entire void was laid out on the ground. In this world, light and shadow flowed, as if there were billions of living beings living in it. There were even all kinds of strange Tao runes and Tao marks flickering in it. It's finally done. Hong Jun let out a long breath, and a satisfied expression appeared on his face. This kind of expression could not even appear on his face when he attained the Tai fruit of the way. But now that he had finally collected all 296 billion beads of the grotto heaven world, he showed it immediately. This was enough to show how much importance he attached to his master's instructions. After letting out a long breath, Hong Jun was finally in the mood to observe his surroundings. With this observation, he was shocked. However, in this period of time, the entire primordial world had undergone an earth-shattering change. At this moment, the primordial chi in the untainted world was extremely dense, but it was also extremely chaotic. Almost at every moment, in every location, there could be primordial chi fluctuations that could kill any itinerant immortal cultivator. Almost at every moment, there could be primordial chi whirlpools that could allow any itinerant immortal cultivator to break through the bottleneck. At this moment, he was high up in the sky, 100,000 miles above the ground. This was originally the border between the untainted world and the endless starry sky. However, at this moment, this position was still close to the ground. Above his head, there was an unknown sky. Under his feet, the ground had become much larger than before. Looking up, in the endless northwest direction, there was an incomparably wide and huge cave that was wide open. Stars were falling from it one after another, bombarding the ground that was countless times deeper and wider than before. And the bombardment of every star caused the entire untainted world to undergo some kind of change, causing the land of the untainted world to have an increase in size that he could even sense slightly. It caused the primordial chi of the untainted world to increase without him needing to concentrate. I see. No wonder Master stopped this from happening before he left. It turns out that this matter will actually cause the untainted world to have such a huge increase. Hong Jun's face revealed an inexplicable expression. This kind of expression was rather complicated. There was enlightenment, admiration, joy, and confusion. The enlightenment was naturally because he thought that he had figured out the reason why the Buddha did not stop the barrier between the endless starry sky and the untainted world from being broken and the stars falling. As for whether Luo Fan had the ability to stop it, Hong Jun did not hesitate at all. Although he did not turn the idea that Luo Fan was omnipotent into a belief, it did not change his trust in Luo Fan. It did not change the feeling that Luo Fan was omnipotent. Therefore, in his heart, with Luo Fan's ability, as long as he wanted to, he would definitely be able to stop all of this from happening. He would definitely be able to reverse the fate of the stars falling. And what he admired was naturally that Luo Fan was actually so farsighted. He was actually able to plan this scene from the beginning, even when he agreed to let his two junior brothers compete for the main character of the world. The next thing he was happy about was that the entire untainted world had received such a huge improvement. As a living being of the untainted world, the improvement of the untainted world meant that he would have more room to display his abilities and obtain more opportunities. Under such circumstances, how could he not be happy? As for the final confusion, Hong Jun suddenly thought that although the untainted world had received such a huge improvement, be it the vastness of the land, the height of the sky, or the concentration of the vitality in the void, the price of all of this was the death of billions of living beings in the untainted world. 99% of the strange beasts in the untainted world had died as a price, and a prosperous civilization that had developed in the untainted world for more than 100 years. Was it worth it? Under such complicated emotions, Hong Jun's thoughts moved slightly. He raised his foot and took a step forward. The void of the untainted world naturally distorted and responded, causing Hong Jun's body to turn illusory. He directly crossed the void and disappeared. When he reappeared, he was already hundreds of millions of miles away in the extreme northwest. It was where the untainted world's Buzhou Mountain used to be. At this moment, it was also where the stars had fallen and bombarded the untainted world. Of course, although he had already attained the Tai Dao fruit, Hong Jun still could not be like Luo Fan. He could not easily stand on the path of the stars and allow them to pass through him without being hurt. Therefore, he could only appear at the edge of the stars and watch them fall, be bombarded, shatter, and disperse into countless star essence. When Hong Jun arrived, a clear voice suddenly echoed in his ears. Not bad, not bad. Not only did you completely collect the grotto heaven within a Yuan Wei, you were also able to directly attain the Tai Dao fruit in the process. You really did not disappoint my expectations. This voice belonged to Luo Fan. As the voice rang out, the void in front of Hong Jun twisted slightly, and a figure appeared in front of him. This figure was just a manifestation of a thought. However, this figure hid an extremely restrained, but also extremely powerful aura. It seemed that as long as it was released, it would be enough to crush Hong Jun in a powder like crushing an ant. At this moment, Hong Jun clearly felt that as long as the figure in front of him was willing, even if his cultivation realm, his strength, and the power of his magic were increased by 10,000 times, he would definitely be able to easily crush him with one finger. This feeling was so ridiculous, but it was also so real that Hong Jun did not doubt this feeling at all. When he understood this, the excitement in Hong Jun's heart due to attaining the Tai Dao fruit directly transformed into a supreme fighting spirit, a fighting spirit to pursue a higher realm. His expression became solemn, and he bowed to the figure manifested by Luo Fan's thoughts. He said, "It's all thanks to Master's guidance that I have made such slight progress. Fortunately, I did not delay Master's matter." The figure manifested by Luo Fan's thoughts naturally saw through all the changes in Hong Jun's mentality, and a satisfied smile appeared on his face. Back then, when he gave the task of collecting 296 billion square grotto heaven to Hong Jun, he had the intention of letting Hong Jun break through his limit in the process and attain the Tai Dao fruit. However, even though he had high expectations for Hong Jun, he did not have absolute confidence that Hong Jun could achieve Tai loose number in this process. Therefore, he arranged for him to have another chance to achieve Tai loose number in case he could not break through. At this moment, Hong Jun's performance not only met his expectations, but even far exceeded his original expectations. This was because not only did he attain Tai, but he also broke through his previous shackles in the process and truly comprehended his own Dao. #free ebook download. Chapter 690. Luo Fan was currently at an unknown depth underground, at the border of the 18 levels of hell. Text first, what he held in his hand was still the bead formed from the core of the Netherworld network. There were still endless threads of light seeping out of the bead, and in the end, It became a huge netherworld network that completely enveloped the entire lower layer of the primordial world. There should have been a sea of blood above the 18 levels of hell. However, because the 18 levels of hell had been constantly flowing out of it for the past 129,600 years, it produced an unfathomable impact. As a result, the boundless sea of blood had long been scattered during this process. Just like the astral wind, lightning, and fire layer that had previously existed in the sky, it had disappeared without a trace. At this moment, Luo Fan was sitting cross-legged on the 18 levels of hell. It was as if there was an extremely hard flat surface at the border between the 18 levels of hell and the earth. It was extremely stable. After this period of time, the 18 levels of hell had been constantly flowing out. Compared to before, there was already a huge difference. The degree of chaos in time seemed to have weakened a lot. In fact, looking down from above, the depth of the 18 levels of hell had also weakened a lot. There were even faint rays of strange light occasionally seeping out from various parts of the 18 levels of hell. The 18 levels of hell were the deepest and most serene places in the entire primordial world. Even light would be completely devoured and wiped out. At this moment, there was actually such a mysterious light. This was enough to show that the 18 levels of hell had already been broken to a certain level. They were not far from completely collapsing. Obviously, the speed of the falling stars in the endless starry sky was balanced. When the stars in the endless starry sky were about to fall to the end, the power in the 18 levels of hell below was also about to be exhausted. Luo Fan stood there without the slightest change in his expression. Just like the previous 129,600 years, he was calm and composed. It was as if everything that happened below was as ordinary as the falling leaves to him. After the 129,600 years of change, the entire primordial world had undergone an earth-shattering change. The distance between the heavens and the earth of the primordial world had increased to an incredible number of 12,960,000 kilometers. Correspondingly, the thickness of the earth had also increased to close to 12,960,000 kilometers. Compared to before, the difference between the two was over 100 times greater. Back then, Pangu consumed all he had, even sacrificed himself, but could only create a world in the chaos with a distance of 100,000 miles. Judging from the fact that back then, Pangu consumed all he had, even sacrificed himself, and could only create a world in the chaos with a distance of 100,000 miles, one could easily tell how great the change was. That was not all the changes in the entire primordial world in this Yuanhui. The area of the lower level of the primordial world was more than 10 times larger than before. Although it was only a seemingly small increase of 10 times, if this multiple was placed on the nearly infinite area of the entire primordial world, one could see how huge the increase was. At this moment, if one looked down from the sky, the primordial world would be divided into 1,296 continents and countless islands under the boundless ocean. None of these continents were as large as the entire Great Wasteland continent. However, the total area was more than 10 times that of the Great Wasteland continent. In other words, the area of every single one of these 1,000+ continents was comparable to 1/100th of the Great Wasteland continent that had a practically boundless area. It was easy to imagine what kind of concept this was. With this change, the Fusang tree and the creation tree, which were originally supporting the world in the other two directions of the primordial world, had already disappeared into an incredible space-time. They seemed to still be in the primordial world, but they also seemed to have left the primordial world and no longer had the function of supporting the primordial world. Apart from that, the concentration of vitality in the primordial world had also increased to an unbelievable level. The entire world was filled with an incredible pressure. This pressure was enough to crush any cultivator who had not become an itinerant immortal into powder. Even cultivators who had become itinerant immortals would feel that their bodies were pressed to the point that they could not move under this pressure. Only perfected immortals could barely move freely. As for flying off the ground, It was absolutely impossible for those who had not reached the golden immortal realm. The incredible pressure did not come from anywhere else, but from the solid primordial chi that filled the entire untainted land. It was more than 1,000 miles thick, spread across the entire untainted land, and completely covered the 1,296 continents and boundless oceans of the entire untainted land. It was precisely because the solid vitality was trying its best to dissipate and evolve into a gaseous state that caused such a shocking pressure to appear in the entire primordial world. On the primordial world, there was a medium-sized continent where Bujo Mountain used to be. This continent was the smallest among the 1,296 continents. However, at the same time, it was also the hardest and most stable among the 1,296 continents. It was also the continent with the densest vitality. This continent was boundless and had a circumference of trillions of kilometers. It was covered with countless ditches. After a period of development, these ditches had undergone all kinds of incredible changes and had long become flat. Moreover, because it was constantly enduring the impact of the falling stars, many ditches have been erased and many ditches have been rebuilt. The geology had been compressed, and in the end, these ditches had formed a mysterious and strange shape. This strange form coincided with the supreme Great Tao, and it seemed to display some sort of true meaning of the supreme Great Tao. It even faintly touched upon all the rules, laws, space, and time in the entire primordial world, causing this continent to contain boundless, unimaginable, and mysterious power. This strange power protected this continent from the impact of the falling stars. At the same time, it turned the fragments produced by the collision of the stars into star essence at an unimaginable speed and method, and transmitted it to the entire primordial world. Because the stars were constantly colliding, it was naturally impossible for this continent to condense solid vitality. Therefore, looking down at the entire primordial world from the sky, one would only see a huge pit that almost completely enveloped the entire continent. At the edge of the pit, the solid yuan chi formed circles and circles of wrinkles. It was as if there were countless powerful forces crashing into the edges of the pit at all times. Above the primordial world, at the edge of the falling stars, a thought of Luo Fan stood opposite Hong Jun. At this moment, Luo Fan's real body was in the deepest part of the primordial world. He controlled the entire Yellow Springs network, so that the evolution of the Yellow Springs network would not go out of control and cause the destruction of the primordial world. However, it was not a problem for him to split a thought to guide Hong Jun. His thought looked to Hong Jun. A gratified smile appeared on his face, and he said, "Since you have already attained the Tai Dao fruit, then the matter of mending the heavens will not be a problem for you." As he spoke, he raised his hand and pointed. A ray of light rushed out of his hand and directly rushed in front of Hong Jun. As soon as Hong Jun sensed the light, he knew that it contained endless information. Without hesitation, he raised his hand and guided the light into his sea of consciousness. It directly fused with the spirit that floated above the 296 billion square world. In an instant, endless information exploded from the light and completely fused with his spirit, allowing him to instantly understand countless unbelievable techniques. He knew how to use the Grotto Heaven Pearl to mend the heavens. "Thank you for the technique, Master." Hong Jun was overjoyed and bowed. Although the information that was transmitted to the spirit from the light only contained the technique of using the Grotto Heaven Pearl to mend the heavens, the supreme truth that was revealed was directly related to the origin of the Great Tao. It was like a supreme mountain that was displayed in front of Hong Jun. This mountain was so tall and majestic that it was as if a brand new door had opened in front of him. It made him faintly feel a supreme realm that far surpassed the Tai Dao fruit. Under such circumstances, how could Hong Jun, who had just attained the Tai Dao fruit and did not know how to cultivate in the future, not be happy? How could not thank him? However, although he was inexplicably happy, Hong Jun also felt how huge the gap between him and his master was. This method was extremely suitable for him. It was obvious that his master had specially created it for him, and it was this method that he had casually created that contained principles that could guide him to a higher and stronger method. The profound skills that were reflected in it made him inexplicably shocked. If this succeeds, the untainted world will be complete and flawless from now on. The supreme great Tao will no longer be lacking, and all living beings in the world will obtain countless benefits from this. If this fails, the entire untainted world will be destroyed, and all living beings in the world will die. You must not be careless, Luo Fan's thoughts said to Hong Jun solemnly. Hong Jun's heart trembled, and he said, I will definitely do my best until the day I die. Luo Fan nodded. With a tremble, the thought disappeared without a trace. Everything Hong Jun needed to know was already in the bit of light he had just sent over. How to choose the right time, how to think of a way to mend the sky, and how to deal with any accidents. Everything was included in it. If that was the case, Hong Jun still needed his guidance to settle this matter. Then Luo Fan could only admit that he had been wrong about this person for countless years. After Luo Fan left, Hong Jun's mind split into two parts. One part surged into void behind his head that contained 296 billion Grotto Heaven World Pearls, while the other part tried his best to pay attention to the endless starry sky above him. At this moment, an indescribable change had already happened to the endless starry sky. The entire endless starry sky had become a thin layer, and the boundless feeling had long disappeared without a trace. At this moment, it was like a thin piece of paper lying above, wrapping the primordial world within it, completely isolating the primordial world from the boundless chaos outside. In the endless starry sky that was as thin as a piece of paper, only hundreds of stars were still piled up at the entrance of the passageway, waiting to squeeze through the entrance and fall into the untainted world. There were 365 stars in total. Every single one of them was larger than the stars that had fallen during the previous Yuanhui. The smallest one was at least 10 times larger than the largest star. Among these 365 stars, there were two largest stars. One emitted the endless essence of the sun and the essence of the sun, while the other emitted the inconceivably strong essence of the moon of the moon of the moon. They were the sun and moon, the two stars formed by Panga's eyes. Even at this moment, the 363 other stars were still maintaining a strange form with the sun and moon. It was as if there was power flowing between them, and there seemed to be boundless power reverberating between the stars. Based on the information sent by his master, Hong Jun knew that these 365 stars were the most important and powerful stars in the entire starry sky. Between them, they formed a very mysterious formation. This formation could expand infinitely. It could absorb countless stars in the sky into the formation, allowing the formation's power to increase infinitely. His master did not name this formation, but the moment Hong Jun saw this formation, he had an incomparably wonderful feeling. This formation is called the Heavenly Cycle Stars. When there were only 365 stars left in the sky, the process of stars squeezing out from the exit of the passage and falling into the ground suddenly stopped. The entire primordial world fell into a strange silence that had never appeared in the past 129,600 years. The loud rumbling that came from the original location of Buzhou Mountain and echoed endlessly in the entire primordial world stopped without any warning. The moment the sound stopped, an aura that signaled the arrival of a storm instantly filled the entire primordial world. Hong Jun instantly understood that the final moment had arrived. These 365 stars were different from the other endless stars. These 365 stars were the foundation of the heavenly cycle star formation. They were the core of the entire starry sky. The connection between them was extremely tight. Even if the entire starry sky collapsed, it would not be able to sever the connection between them, nor would it cause the formation to collapse. As a result, these 365 stars did not fall like all the other stars in the previous Yuanhui. Instead, they fell one by one in a continuous stream. Instead, it was the 365 stars that had combined into a single entity and fallen together. Although the entrance of the passage was incredibly elastic and could accommodate stars that were countless times larger than the passage itself, there was a limit to its elasticity. It was already a little difficult for any one of the 365 giant stars to pass through this passage. It was extremely likely that the passage would be destroyed in the process. How could it be possible for the 365 giant stars to squeeze through this passage as a whole? Before Luo Fan taught him the heaven-mending technique, Hong Jun only thought that his master wanted him to fill the sky with 1,296 million square grotto heavens after the passage was crushed and the 365 stars passed through. However, after receiving Luo Fan's teachings, he thought that his master's plan was a million times simpler. Mending the sky was not as simple as he thought. The changes in the entire primordial world were not as simple as what he saw. The truly huge and incredible changes that could change the essence of the entire primordial world had only just begun. Hong Jun stood there and recalled the various techniques that Luo Fan had taught him. His mind was constantly manipulating the space behind his head. The 1,296 million grotto heavens world pearls slowly circulated during the process. An indescribably terrifying power was rapidly born during the circulation. This power was so powerful that it kept accumulating in the void. It gradually turned from illusory to real, and then into a dazzling light. It was like a chaotic light formed by the combination of countless colors. In the sky, the bizarre entity formed by the 296 billion grotto heaven world beads gradually turned the sky into a grayish color. Even the light emitted by the 296 billion grotto heaven world beads was covered by the grayish color and gradually became harder to see. He floated in the void, and his expression became more and more serious. The primordial unity Tao fruit that had just formed in his body had already exploded during the process. It turned into a Dharma power that flowed continuously in his body according to an extremely mysterious path. Endless primordial chi constantly surged into his body. Through various incredible changes, it constantly stimulated his mind during the process of rapid consumption. This allowed his mind, which had already been stimulated to the extreme, to surpass its limit in an almost impossible situation and continue to rise. As his mind rose, his control over the space behind his head continued to increase. Faintly, the 1,296 million grotto heavens world pearls gradually circulated at a faster speed. During this process, the power that emitted the gray light and covered the entire space above the void grew at an even faster speed. Its intensity and density were both increasing rapidly. When the aura of the approaching storm that filled the entire untainted land reached its strongest point, the power was so dense that it completely covered the 296 billion grotto heaven world pearls in the sky. # free ebook download. Chapter 691. At that moment, at the bottom of the untainted world, Luo Fan was also fully focused. Although his expression was still calm, there was a hint of seriousness in his eyes. Text first, full text, no advertising. The subsequent development would be the key to whether the entire primordial world could survive. If he did not deal with it well, all the effort he had put in during the previous Yuan Hui period would be for naught. The entire untainted land would definitely be smashed into pieces in an instant. All the space and time would collapse and eventually merge into the boundless chaos of the outside world. Although Luo Fan was already self-sufficient and independent after attaining the Zenith Heaven Tao fruit, he did not seek external help and completely cut off all his connections with the primordial world. He could not survive freely in the chaos state. Thus, disregarding everything else, just this outcome alone was a calamity to him, and it was something he absolutely couldn't accept. However, with such a dangerous side, there was naturally a wonderful side. If he could respond appropriately in the following changes, the entire primordial world would be able to survive in a way that was 10 times larger than before until the next great tribulation of heaven and earth. Just this alone was enough for Luo Fan to put in 120% of his effort, Not to mention that there were many other benefits. For example, the primordial world was 10 times wider, and the distance between the heavens and the earth had increased by more than 100 times. The types of living beings that could be born in it would at least be more than 100 times more than before. The number of cultivators that could be carried would also be countless times more than before. In this way, the development stage that could be provided for the many disciples under Luo Fan's tutelage had naturally increased by many times. At such a crucial moment, how could Luo Fan not concentrate and wait? As there were only 365 stars left in the endless starry sky of the primordial world that had yet to fall, the 18 hells below also reached their final moments. At this moment, even though the 18 levels of hell were still boundlessly vast and dark, it seemed to be on the verge of collapse. It was as if the entire 18 levels of hell would collapse in the next moment, and all the power within would erupt. And in Luo Fan's eyes, which had become many times more powerful after attaining the grand immortal scattered Tao, the essence of the 18 levels of hell below was not concealed at all, and directly appeared in his eyes. In the eyes of others, the 18 levels of hell were a boundless curtain of darkness. At most, due to the constant depletion of energy over the past Yuan Hui, a strange light would occasionally flicker. However, in Luo Fan's eyes, the 18 levels of hell before him were 18 gigantic spheres that were each 10 times the size of a giant star. These spheres were not physical objects, nor were they objects condensed from energy like the giant star. They were, in fact, 18 spacetimes. These spacetimes were completely independent of the primordial world. Every spacetime seemed illusory and real, faintly discernible. If one were to look at it from a physical point of view, each of these spacetime spaces might only be the size of a thumb. However, if it was spread out and looked at from another perspective, this spacetime was boundless, and it was even easy for it to contain millions of primordial worlds. This other perspective was the perspective of will. The reason for this was because the 18 spacetimes were fundamentally different from the material spacetimes like the primordial world. Although they were not mental spacetimes, they could only accommodate illusory, living beings. In other words, they could only accommodate the souls, wills, and spiritual senses of living beings. This was the essence of the 18 spacetimes, which was also the essence of the 18 levels of hell. It was precisely because the 18 levels of hell existed in this form that they could accommodate endless energy and distort time in such an unbelievable state. The space was boundlessly vast, so it could accommodate endless energy. The space was extremely narrow, so the effect of the energy could be maximized, and in the end, the laws of time would undergo a miraculous change. The 18 spacetimes did not exist just now. Instead, they had existed since the 18 levels of hell appeared. However, previously, the 18 spacetimes had fused with the primordial world under the nourishment of endless energy. The distance between them had been completely blurred, causing the 18 spacetimes to be invisible and undetectable. There were no advertisements. At that moment, because all the energy had been exhausted to the extreme, the 18 spacetimes could no longer fuse and completely separated. As a result, they revealed their true form and were easily seen through by Luo Fan. Other than the 365 giant stars in the endless starry sky above, the next danger was the 18 spacetimes. That was because the 18 spacetimes were slowly and unstoppably squeezing into the primordial world through the tributary of the Yellow Springs. Each of the 18 spacetimes materialized into a sphere that was 10 times larger than the giant star above. If one of them squeezed in, it would be enough to completely shatter the entire untainted land, let alone when all 18 of them squeezed in together. It could be predicted that if Luo Fan did not take any measures, the fate that awaited the primordial world was, first, the huge Yellow Springs network that covered the entire primordial world would be shattered by the 18 spacetimes. During this process, the entire lower level of the primordial world would be completely shattered. Then, because of the endless energy in the primordial world, the spacetime reappeared and spread out. It directly devoured all the continents, islands, and oceans in the lower level of the primordial world. In the end, it was replaced by boundless space-time. In the end, because the space-time lost the support of the primordial world, it was crushed by the chaotic state of the outside world and instantly exploded. The boundless chaos directly devoured it along with the entire primordial world. At that point, the world was destroyed and the primordial world was destroyed. In the boundless state of chaos, there was no longer the existence of the primordial world. That was only the result after the 18 levels of hell below allowed it to develop. Not to mention that above, the heavenly cycle star formation formed by the 365 giant stars was attacking the passage connecting the endless starry sky and the primordial world. It could also cause the sky to collapse. The void in the endless starry sky collapsed and spread down. In the end, it devoured the sky of the primordial world, connected with the 18 levels of hell, and replaced the sky of the primordial world. And that would obviously cause the 18 levels of hell to replace the earth. The same result would cause the primordial world to lose its support. It would be broken by the chaotic state and completely devoured the primordial world. Luo Fan was naturally very clear about this outcome. In fact, he had already expected such a wave before a period of time. He had also made countless preparations. At that moment, he did not hesitate at all. With a slight thought, his perception followed the netherworld network and the endless Dharma power that he had set up above the endless starry sky and the primordial world. It continued to spread out. After achieving the zenith heaven dispersing Tao, his own ability was already able to include the entire primordial world into his perception in the form of an outline. At that moment, with the help of the netherworld network and the endless Dharma power, his perception ability had increased beyond imagination. In an instant, the entire untainted land, which was 10 times larger and more than 100 times more substantial than before, was completely absorbed by his senses. Even the tiniest speck of dust that existed in the untainted land could not escape his senses. At that moment, an indescribable strange power spread throughout the entire primordial world. Unfortunately, the few powerful living beings that still remained in the primordial world had been frozen and sealed by the endless primordial chi. They had completely lost their perception of the outside world. Otherwise, all living beings in the primordial world would probably feel that a saint had been born in the primordial world. After all, in the hearts of all living beings, only saints could be omniscient. They could see the entire primordial world as if they were looking at palm prints. As for the only one in the primordial world, Hong Jun, who still had a complete body, had already devoted all his attention to preparing for the next matter of mending the heavens. Although the supreme power was strong, it could not attract too much attention from him. Naturally, there was no need to talk about him. In the blink of an eye, all the changes had already reached the limit. In an instant, the aura that was about to arrive disappeared, and the entire primordial world trembled. Faintly, there seemed to be endless wails coming from the boundless void of the primordial world. It was unknown where the strange sounds came from. They mixed with the wails, revealing a feeling that was enough to make any living being feel that a great calamity was about to befall them. These changes were not because of anything else. Instead, it was because the heavenly cycle star formation, which had originally connected the endless stars into one and firmly protected the primordial world, had already begun to squeeze towards the primordial world. It was trying its best to pass through the passageway that was billions of times smaller than any of the 365 stars. Due to the protection of Luo Fan's endless Dharma powers, the passageway was unbelievably elastic. It could allow countless stars that were countless times larger than these passageways to pass through one after another for an entire period of time. However, when these 365 giant stars were connected together, it had already exceeded the limit of the passage. In an instant, the passageway was filled with countless cracks. These cracks were like spider webs, and they could be easily seen even in the primordial world. It was also because of the existence of these cracks that one could raise their heads in the primordial world to see how long the passageway was, and how mysterious the passageway was. The countless spiderweb-like cracks expanded outwards from the exit of the passageway in a flat form. After they had expanded to more than half of the primordial world, they folded upwards, converged, and continuously extended upwards. In the end, they extended for an unknown number of billions of kilometers before they connected to the heavenly cycle star formation. The reason why it could be seen was because the intersecting distribution of the cracks was like drawing a three-dimensional portrait on a piece of white paper, outlining such a three-dimensional and astonishing shape of the passageway. It was also this outline that allowed Hong Jun to clearly see that the 365 stars were squeezing through the passageway at an unimaginable speed, scattering the endless Dharma powers that surrounded the passageway, causing the Dharma powers to pile up around the 365 stars in vain, like the clouds of the stars. At this moment, Hong Jun's expression was indescribably solemn. In the void behind his head, the 296 billion grotto heavens and world pearls were operating at their limits. The entire void had long been filled with the gray power, and there was not a single gap, let alone any light of other colors. It was as if the purpose of the void's existence was only to bear the gray power. Just a little bit more. He silently observed the speed at which the passageway was collapsing, weighing whether the time to mend the sky had come. He tried hard to suppress the Dharma powers in his body, and his will to fuse with the void behind his head. The pressure of death enveloped him. The Dharma powers he had just stabilized and upgraded to the primordial level were circulating wildly in his body at an unimaginable speed. If this magic power was regarded as a physical substance, even if Hong Jun's body was thousands of times harder than diamond, no matter how smooth the magic power was, Hong Jun's body must have been burned to ashes by the heat generated by the friction under the speed of the magic power circulation. From this, one could see how intense the Dharma powers were circulating. Just as Hong Jun was silently calculating the time, the 18 space-times under the untainted land began to squeeze toward the untainted land at the same time. In the endless starry sky above the untainted land, there was still the passageway constructed by Luo Fan's Dharma powers as a buffer. The 18 space-times below directly pressed toward the untainted land without any buffer. The way through was the tributary of the Yellow Spring. After enduring the endless energy of the 18 hells for a period of time, the tributary of the Yellow Spring that connected the 18 hells was no longer the same as when Luo Fan had first constructed it. In the process, the tributary of the Yellow Spring seemed to have been refined by the 18 hells and had already become one with them. There was almost no difference between them. This made it difficult for Luo Fan to sever the tributary of the Yellow Spring so that the 18 spacetimes would not be squeezed into the primordial world so quickly because of the existence of the tributary of the Yellow Spring. It was difficult, but it was not impossible. If Luo Fan was willing to spend the power to break the 18 hells or give up a large part of the Yellow Spring network, the connection could naturally be cut off. However, that was meaningless. If the 18 hells were broken, the changes in the primordial world would not be balanced. Even if the changes of the 365 giant stars above could achieve the most perfect result and completely transform into the power to stabilize the primordial world would lose its balance because of the destruction of the 18 hells. In the end, it would gradually collapse over time. This process might last for tens of thousands of years, but compared to the lifespan of the entire primordial world that was calculated in trillions of years, what was the difference between this and a quick death? As for giving up a large part of the Netherworld network, it could at most delay time for a few days. The crushing of the 18 spacetimes could not be stopped. The final outcome did not change at all, so it was naturally meaningless. Therefore, at that moment, Luo Fan could only rely on himself to sort out and guide the pressure of the 18 spacetimes. At that moment, the entire primordial world was included in his perception. The entire Netherworld network, the various subtle interactions between the Netherworld network and the primordial world, and the supreme great Tao of the primordial world were constantly adjusting and responding. None of them could escape his perception. When the 18 spacetimes pressed towards the primordial world, it instantly caused the entire netherworld network to tremble continuously. Countless cracks even appeared, as if it was about to collapse and be destroyed at any time. At that moment, he began to move. In the endless sky, the endless pressure produced by the heavenly cycle star formation formed by 365 giant stars crushed the Dharma power channel was guided by him through some mysterious channel and used on the entire netherworld network. The heavenly cycle star formation was formed by 365 giant stars, each of which was at least 10 times larger than the largest star that had fallen in the past 129,600 years. Just this alone showed how enormous the crushing force was. Coupled with the fact that the crushing force of the universe stellar formation was mixed with the enormous force created by the collapse and destruction of the boundless starry sky, the strength of the crushing force had broken through the limit a long time ago, and it arrived at an indescribable and indescribable state. Naturally, it was impossible to completely guide this power and transfer it over without leaving anything behind. At the very least, with Luo Fan's current cultivation realm at the peak of the zenith heaven dispersing Tao realm, it was impossible. Therefore, even though this power had been guided over, the crushing of the heavenly cycle star formation on the channel did not disappear. The channel continued to shatter under the pressure, and the Dharma power that formed the channel continued to accumulate around the stars, forming a faint cloud. It was just that the speed had decreased by a lot. The power that Luo Fan had guided over and used on the netherworld network did not attack the netherworld network. Instead, it formed a powerful restriction and pressure on the netherworld network. This kind of restraint, this kind of pressure came from the outside, affecting every inch of the Yellow Springs network. This method of going from the outside to the inside was the opposite of how the netherworld network was impacted by the 18 layers of hell. The 18 layers of time and space squeezed the netherworld network through the Yellow Springs tributary and flowed into the netherworld network. In the end, it spread to every inch of the netherworld network. This process was naturally transmitted by the Yellow Springs water in the netherworld network. The effect of the netherworld network was naturally from the inside to the outside. These two kinds of power, one from the inside to the outside, and the other from the outside to the inside. Apart from the incredible pressure they exerted on the Yellow Springs, they also canceled each other out. This kind of canceling was naturally not complete. After all, Luo Fan had guided it down from above, so the power of the stars crushing the passage wasn't complete, but the power of the 18 layers of hell squeezing into the Yellow Springs was not reduced in the slightest. This difference caused the power that went from the inside to the outside to be much greater than the power that went from the outside to the inside. The result of this was that the cracks on the surface of the Yellow Springs continued to increase during this process. Every tributary and main stream of the Yellow Springs in the netherworld network continued to swell, as if they could explode at any time. However, the rate at which the cracks increased was much slower than before, but it had barely reached the limit of the netherworld network. Although the cracks continued to appear, at the same time, the netherworld network's repairability was also constantly working hard to eliminate the cracks so that the netherworld network would not really explode. #free ebook download.